Welcome back to Harry's Cosmos, where every story begins with two words. What if? Today's what if. What if Narcissa secretly raised Harry and Hermione as Trueborn Blacks? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now settle in and let's begin. Chapter 1. The Rota Sanguinis. The candles in the west drawing room of Malfoy Manor burned green that night, and Narcissa knew before anyone told her that the war had turned. She had been reading by the fire or holding a book while the fire read her, when the flames along the wall sconces guttered and went the color of pond ice. Lucius kept those candles charmed to answer the dark mark. When the mark stirred, they flickered. When it burned, they burned black. She had never seen them do this, thin themselves to a sick marsh-water green and then one by one down the long room snuff entirely, so that the only light left was the ordinary orange of the hearth and her own held breath in her chest. Upstairs, Draco began to cry. She did not go to him at once. She sat very still and let the house tell her what it knew. A door somewhere below opened and did not close. Lucius's voice, low, then not low. A second man's voice she recognized, Rookwood or someone with Rookwood's careful diction, saying a word she caught only the shape of. Gone. She turned the word over. It could mean a raid failed. It could mean a name struck from a ledger. It could, if the candles were to be believed, mean the one thing none of them had ever prepared a face for. Narcissa set the book down, spine up, so it would keep her place, and went to her son. Draco quieted the instant she lifted him, as he always did, his fist finding the collar of her robe and holding on like the fabric owed him something. She stood at the nursery window with him against her shoulder and looked out at the grounds, where the peacocks had scattered white into the dark, and the yew hedges made their tall black shapes against a sky gone strange. Somewhere past the wards, past the river, past everything her husband's money had drawn around this house, a thing had happened that would rearrange the world. She could feel it as one feels a tide change, low in the stomach, before the water ever moves. She had married into certainty. That was the bargain, spoken and unspoken. The Malfoys were sure of themselves in a way the Blacks, for all their arrogance, had stopped being sure a generation ago. Lucius did not lie awake. Lucius did not count the family dead. But Narcissa had grown up in a house whose walls were literally a family tree, and she had watched the faces on that tree go out one by one, burned off by her mother's wand when they married wrong or thought wrong or in one case simply loved wrong. Regulus, gone at 18, no grave to speak of. Sirius, gone into the war on the other side and now, they said, into a cell. Andromeda, scorched from the wall entirely for the crime of a Muggle-born husband and a daughter with rose-colored hair. Bellatrix, who had not gone out at all but had burned so hot she unnerved even the men she served. Of the daughters of the House of Black, Narcissa was the one left standing in a lit room. She had always understood this to be a kind of survival. Tonight, holding her son at the window while the candles died, she understood it as something closer to a sentence. She put Draco down when he slept and went to find her husband. Lucius was in his study with the door ajar, which he never did, and he was pouring fire whiskey with a hand that would not quite hold the neck of the decanter still against the glass. His left sleeve was pushed up. On the pale inside of his forearm the mark had gone gray, not black, not the hot red of summoning, gray like ash a moment after the fire leaves it, the skull's mouth slack and the serpent limp through it. He's fallen, Narcissa said. She did not make it a question. Lucius looked at her over the glass. Whatever else her husband was, he was not a man who wasted a lie on his wife when the truth would arrive on its own. At Godric's Hollow, he said, the Potters are dead. He went to finish the child and he stopped. She watched him choose which of the impossible things to say. The child lives. He does not. That is all Rookwood has. The mark did the rest of the telling. The child lives. Narcissa held those three words as she had held Draco, carefully, without seeming to hold them at all. How can that be, she said, because it was the thing a Malfoy wife would say, and because she wanted to hear him try to answer. It cannot, Lucius drank, and yet the mark is gray. Half of them will spend the night burning their robes. The other half will spend it deciding they were never anything but loyal servants of the ministry, misled, cursed. By morning there will be a great many innocent men in England. His mouth did something that was not a smile. I intend to be one of them, so do you. Of course, Narcissa said. She had learned young how to hold two thoughts at once and let only the safe one reach her face. The safe thought was, we will need lawyers and galleons and the right words in the right ears, and Lucius will manage all of it, because managing exactly this is the thing he was built to do. The other thought, the one she kept behind her eyes where he could not see it, was a single point of cold light far off, like a star that had been there all along and had only now cleared the trees. The child lives. Whose child? She knew whose child. Everyone with a memory for the family trees of England knew whose child. James Potter's mother had been Doria. Doria Black, daughter of Cygnus, sister to Pollux, a face on the tapestry 2 rooms over from where Narcissa had learned to read. Doria had married a Potter and had not been burned off for it, because the Potters were pure enough and old enough that even her mother's generation could not find the excuse. Doria Black Potter, which made James her cousin, once removed and mostly forgotten, and which made the child asleep tonight in the ruin of a Godric's hollow cottage. The child the whole dark had failed to kill. Black blood. a drop of it, a spoon of it, but blood the tapestry would recognize if it were ever asked. And they were going to give him to Muggles. She knew it as she knew the tide. Dumbledore would not let the boy who lived, for they would call him that by breakfast, she was certain of it, the whole shouting country of them, grow up where anyone could reach him. He would hide him. And there was no hiding a wizard child so complete, in Dumbledore's arithmetic, as burying him in the ordinary world, among people who would not know a wand from a walking stick, who would raise him small and cowed and blank until the day the old man wanted him grand. Narcissa had met the child's aunt once at a distance, at a wedding she had attended only to be seen attending. Petunia Evans, married to a red-faced man who sold drills. She remembered the woman's neck stretching to see over the crowd and the particular set of her mouth when someone had lifted a wand to light the cake. There was no love waiting in that house. There was a cupboard. Narcissa, Lucius was watching her. You've gone somewhere. I'm counting, she said, which was true. The people who will come to this house in the next 3 days and what each of them will want. That answer he liked. He set down his glass and crossed to her and put his cool, dry hand along her jaw, and for a moment they were two clever people alone in a burning country, which was, she supposed, the truest description of their marriage anyone would ever get. You'll manage them, he said. You always do. I always do, she agreed. She let him believe she was thinking of dinners. She did not sleep. She lay beside her husband until his breathing lengthened, and then she rose, and she did not light a candle, because the house was watching and she had spent 30 years learning to move through watched houses. There was a room at Malfoy Manor that Lucius did not enter because it was hers, part of the settlement her father had insisted on, and Abraxas had conceded with the air of a man overpaying for a horse. A narrow stone room off the old solar, unwarded by Malfoy magic, warded instead by black. Inside it stood the few things she had brought out of Grimmauld Place and out of her girlhood that she had not been willing to leave to her mother's cold keeping. A trunk, a mirror that did not always show the room, and on a shelf her mother would have called sentimental and therefore weak, a shallow basin of black stone no wider than a soup plate, its rim carved in letters older than the family's memory of what they meant. The Rota Sanguinis, the Wheel of Blood. Great-Aunt Cassiopeia had put it into Narcissa's hands the winter before she died, in a house on the moors that the rest of the family had forgotten existed, and had said, in her dry voice that sounded like pages turning, "You are the only one of them who still knows the difference between blood and slaughter. Keep this, keep the house. When you finally do the thing you are too well-bred to know you want to do, you will need both." Narcissa had not understood her. She had thought it the wandering of an old woman with too many dead to talk to. She had taken the basin and the deed to Corby House out of politeness and put them on a shelf and not looked at either for 4 years. She looked now. She set the basin on the floor and knelt to it, and she drew the pin from her own hair, a black pin with a small pearl, and pricked the pad of her thumb and let one drop fall into the dry stone bowl. The letters around the rim woke. They did not glow so much as darken, going from stone gray to a black that had light somewhere inside it, and the drop of her blood did not spread and did not dry but sat up on the stone like a bead of mercury and began, very slowly, to turn. The Wheel of Blood shows you your blood, Cassiopeia had said, every one of it, living and near and in need. It is why the family stopped using it. They did not like to be reminded how few of us were left, or how many of the ones we'd thrown away were still out there, being alive without us. The drop turned, and the surface of the stone under it went to dark water, and in the water Narcissa saw. She saw Bellatrix first, because Bellatrix was blood and Bellatrix was near a stone cell, a woman's shape rocking, laughing at something no one else could hear. She looked away. She saw Andromeda asleep in a house that smelled, she somehow knew, of chalk dust and a child's paint, one arm flung over the edge of the bed toward the space where a husband was not, because he was working a night shift in the ordinary world. She held on that one a moment longer than she meant to. Then the water moved north and west to a village with a broken cottage and showed her a child. He was sitting up in a cot in a room whose roof was half open to the stars, and there was a cut on his forehead in the shape of something the eye did not want to finish reading, and he was not crying. That was the thing that undid the careful arithmetic Narcissa had been doing since the candles died. He was not crying. He had been left in the wreck of everything with his mother cooling on the floor below him, and he had gone quiet and watchful, and he was looking at the door of the ruined room as though he already understood that doors were where either rescue or ruin came from, and a person had better keep an eye on them. 15 months old and already keeping watch. No, Narcissa said aloud to the empty stone room. She had not decided anything. She wanted that on the record of her own conscience. She had not decided anything, and then she heard herself say no, which was the sound a decision makes when it has already been made somewhere below the place where you keep your reasons. The water moved again before she could tell it to stop. It slid south, and it did a thing the basin had not done for any of the others. It flickered, uncertain, and then steadied on a second child. This one was in an ordinary room, a Muggle room, a cot pushed against a wall painted the yellow that institutions choose because it is supposed to be cheerful. A little girl, older than Harry, near 2, with a fall of brown hair and her fists closed and her whole body drawn tight in her sleep as children draw tight when they have learned that the dark does not always bring back the person who left. And around her, faint, no more than a warmth on the water, was the mark the basin used for kin. Faint. Very faint, a thread of black blood so thin and so far down some disowned and forgotten branch that the family would have laughed at the idea of counting it. But the Rhoda did not laugh, and it did not lie, and it had never in its long life shown Narcissa a stranger. She sat back on her heels in the cold room, one thumb bleeding onto her thumbnail, and looked at the 2 children the wheel of blood had chosen to show her, and understood that Cassiopeia had not been wandering at all. The thing you are too well-bred to know you want to do, she wanted to save something. She had wanted it for years and had not had a word clean enough to say it with. Not the house, not the name, not the cause her husband served with his cold, competent devotion and his gray, ruined arm. She wanted to take one thing out of the fire the family had spent a century building around itself and raise it somewhere the fire could not reach, and love it in the plain, unpolitic way her mother had trained out of her before she was 6. 2 things, the basin said. There are 2. All right, Narcissa said to Cassiopeia, to the dead, to the star that had cleared the trees. All right, both. Getting Harry was, in the end, a matter of being faster than a giant. She did not have long. Dumbledore would move tonight. His instinct for the sentimental gesture would take him to the Muggle relatives, and Narcissa had no illusion that she could out-scheme the man who had beaten Grindelwald across a chessboard the size of Europe. What she could do was be at Godric's Hollow before whoever he sent, and she could be, because she had a basin that told her exactly which broken cottage and which morning village, and Dumbledore had only an address written in his own careful hand and a giant to send for it. She apparated to the lane below the church and walked up through a village that did not yet know what had happened at its edge. The cottage stood with its upper story blown outward. There were oars coming. She could feel the wards they were laying at the far end of the lane, clumsy and loud, and there was, closer, a sound she took at first for a large animal and then understood to be a man weeping, enormous, helpless, from inside the wreck. Hagrid, Dumbledore had sent the gamekeeper. Of course he had, the half-giant loved as a dog loves, without arithmetic, and could carry a child through anything. He would carry the child straight into the world's arms, and the world would clap and coo, and then hand him to the drill salesman. Narcissa did not fight Hagrid. You did not fight Hagrid, you arranged for Hagrid to be somewhere else. She stood in the dark below the garden wall and cast the one piece of true, ugly, useful magic her mother had ever taught her that she did not regret knowing. A lure, a voice pitched to sound like a hurt thing dying in the trees at the bottom of the garden. It was cruel to use it on a man like that. She used it anyway, and she promised herself she would be sorry later, when there was room. Hagrid's great sobbing shape lurched out through the back of the ruin toward the sound, calling out, and Narcissa went in through the front while he was gone. The stairs held. The room at the top was the one the basin had shown her, and the child was still sitting up, still watching the door, and when she came through it he did not scream. He looked at her with James Potter's face and Lily Evans's green eyes and made a sound of inquiry, testing whether she might be the person the door was supposed to bring. Yes, Narcissa told him, which was not an answer to anything he had asked, and she lifted him out of the cot, and he came to her shoulder and took the collar of her robe in his fist and held on, exactly as her own son held on, and she stood for one heartbeat in the ruin with 2 children's fists having chosen her in a single night, and then she turned and carried him down and out and away before the giant's weeping could find its way back to the house. She left the lure singing in the trees. It would fade by dawn. Hagrid would search and find nothing and go back to Dumbledore with empty arms and a story no one would fully believe, and the country would wake to discover that its savior was a day old and already lost. Let them look. She was very good at not being found. The girl took longer because the girl had to be taken cleanly, without a hunt behind her. She was in a Muggle children's home in a grey town in the Midlands, and she had no name that the home was sure of and no people that anyone could produce, and she had, 3 days before, made every window on the ground floor frost over in July when a larger child took her blanket. The staff had written it in the ledger as a fault in the glass. The ministry, which watched for exactly such faults, had a file open and a junior clerk assigned to visit within the fortnight, and if Narcissa had come a month later, she would have been prizing the child out of a ministry orphanage instead of a Muggle one, which was a far harder theft. She came as a woman from an agency with papers that agreed with themselves and a manner that did not invite questions, and she signed a name that was not hers, and the tired good woman at the desk asked fewer questions than she might have, one difficult case the lighter, the frost in July one gone off her hands. Narcissa carried the little girl out into a car park under a sodium light, and the child looked up at her with brown eyes gone huge and said quite clearly, the first full word Narcissa ever heard her say, book. She had been holding one when Narcissa lifted her. A board book chewed at one corner that she had refused to let go of. She held it up now like a question or an offering. Yes, Narcissa said again to a second child in a second dark. Yes, as many as you like. Then she took them both to the moors, to the house Cassiopeia had left her, and began the work of making them real. Corby House stood where the map said there was only heather. It was not large, as the great houses of England go, not Malfoy Manor, with its peacocks and its performance. It was a long, low grey house folded into a fold of the northern moor, its back to the wind, its windows small and deep, a walled garden gone to seed on the leeward side, and above the door a weathered stone corby with its wings half spread and its beak worn smooth by 200 years of rain, unplottable, unmapped. It did not appear to owls, to the trace, to the flu registry, to any census the ministry had ever taken. Cassiopeia had built it to be forgotten, and the family had obliged her, and now it was the one property of the House of Black that no ledger in England knew existed. The elf was waiting on the step. She was ancient even by the standards of her kind, her skin gone the grey of the house's own stone, her ears folded down with age, and she wore, instead of the pillowcase of a servant, a scrap of tapestry with the black arms still faintly worked in it, which she had clearly made herself and which she clearly considered a uniform of honor. She looked at Narcissa and at the two children Narcissa carried, one on each arm, and her enormous eyes filled. "Mistress Cassiopeia said you would come," the elf said. Her voice was cracked and fierce. She said, "Nettle, the last of the good ones will come to this door with her arms full, and you will let her in, and you will not let anyone else in ever again. Nettle has been letting no one in for 4 years, mistress. Nettle is very good at it." "Nettle," Narcissa said, and found her own voice not entirely steady, which she noted and set aside for later, when there was room. "I am going to ask you to keep a secret larger than any elf has ever kept." "Nettle keeps the house," the elf said in a tone that settled the matter, and stood aside, and Narcissa carried the children in out of the wind. She did the right that night, because there was no safe night to wait for. Cassiopeia had left instructions in a hand that turned to smoke as Narcissa read the last word of each line, so that the knowledge could exist nowhere but in the one head that had earned it. Narcissa built the fire in the old hall where the tapestry hung, a smaller cousin of the great one at Grimmauld, the same tree grown from the same root, updating itself in real time through some sympathy of magic the family had never bothered to explain to its daughters. She laid the two sleeping children on a bed of black wool before the hearth. She set the rota sanguinis on the stone between them. And she took the black signet from the chain at her throat, where she had worn it hidden under her Malfoy pearls for 11 years of marriage, and she pressed it into the wax of her own blood at the bottom of the basin, and she began to speak the old words in the old order, and the room answered. This was where the family had always kept its true power, and it was nothing like the dark her husband served. The dark took, it hollowed a thing out and wore the skin. This was older and colder, and in some way Narcissa had no theology for cleaner. It was the magic of belonging, of a bloodline insisting on itself down the centuries, of a house that had decided in some founding dark that its members would know each other in the marrow and be known. It did not care what the ministry wrote in a book, it cared what the blood said, and Narcissa was about to make the blood say something new. She cut her palm properly, not the thumbpin of divination but a true wound, because a true thing was being asked, and she pressed her open hand to Harry's chest over the drum of his heart, and she named him. "Harry," she said, because she would not take from him the one word his dead mother had chosen. "Harry Arcturus of the House of Black, Trueborn, mind to keep and mind to answer for, from marrow to name in this world and in the wheel of it, and let the house know him." The fire went white. It did not roar, it stood up straight and turned the color of the hottest part of a star and held there silent, and the light of it went through the child on the wool so that for one breath Narcissa could see the small bones of him lit from inside, the heart a dark knot, and along the thin bright rivers of him the blood changed. She felt it in her own cut hand, a wrenching sympathy, a rewriting, the drop of Doria that had come down to him widening, deepening, being answered and multiplied by the house that had thrown Doria's granddaughters lying half away, and now, through Narcissa, reached down and gathered him back up out of the ruin and said, in the only language that had never lied to the family, "Ours." On the wall, the tapestry moved. A thread of it, low down on a branch everyone had considered ended, brightened from grey wool to gold and stitched itself, letter by letter, into a name that had not been there when the sun set. Harry Arcturus Black. The little worked line that showed descent ran up from his new name and found, impossibly correctly, the faded face of Doria, and drew a gold thread between them that had always been true and had only now been admitted. Narcissa did not stop to marvel. Marveling was for people with time. She turned to the girl. "Hermione," she said, because the Holmes ledger had, under a dozen wrong guesses, recorded one word the child answered to, and Narcissa would not rob her of it either. "Hermione Cassiopeia of the House of Black, Trueborn, mind to keep and mind to answer for, from marrow to name in this world and in the wheel of it, and let the house know her." She had braced for the house to balk. The girl's thread was so thin. A drop and a drop and a drop, some squib turned out generations back for the crime of a wandless life, married away into the ordinary world and forgotten so thoroughly the family had lost even the satisfaction of hating the name. Narcissa half expected the fire to sputter, the tapestry to refuse, the wheel to show her she had overreached. The fire went white again and did not hesitate at all. The house knew her. It knew her as you know a coin you dropped long ago and had stopped looking for, the moment your fingers close on it in the dark under a chair. With a jolt of the familiar, of course, there you are. The girl's thread on the tapestry ran up and up through the ruined, disowned branches, past a dozen burned faces, and touched a name so old and so scorched that Narcissa could no longer read it, and married the girl to the tree with a gold that burned, if anything, brighter than Harry's, like the house had been waiting a very long time to have this particular lost thing back. Hermione Cassiopeia Black. Below Harry's name, beside it, there 2 gold threads on the great gray field of the dead, brand new and already looking as though they had always been there. The fire sank to ordinary orange. The children slept through all of it, which the instructions had promised they would. The right took only from the one who chose, and Narcissa's palm would ache for a week and scar for a lifetime, and she considered both a fair price and, if she were honest, in the one room in England where she could afford to be, a bargain. Nettle came and stood beside her and looked up at the 2 new gold names on the wall and made a sound Narcissa had never heard an elf make, a kind of keening that was entirely joy. 2, Nettle whispered. Mistress Cassiopeia said perhaps 1, she never said 2. The elf turned her huge wet eyes up. They are Trueborn now. The house will hide them in its own body. No trace will find them under this roof. No ministry quill will write them. They are Blacks, mistress, down to the smallest bone, and the family that threw so many away has stolen 2 back. She bared her teeth, which on an elf is not a smile but a vow. Nettle will die before she lets 1 hair of them come to harm. So will I, Narcissa said, and was faintly astonished to find it was the plainest true thing she had said in years. The wards took 3 nights to raise, and she raised them alone, because there was no one alive she trusted with the knowledge of the door. Fidelius was the heart of it. She made herself secret keeper, not a friend, not a sworn man herself, so that the secret lived and died in the one place no torture would think to look first and no ledger could ever subpoena, behind Narcissa Malfoy's poised and ordinary face. The words of the location went into her and out of the world. Corby House, already unplottable, now ceased to exist for anyone she did not personally, deliberately, take by the hand and tell. Over the Fidelius she layered the old black defenses Cassiopeia's instructions gave up one by one before turning to smoke, a blood ward that would let no one cross the threshold whom the tapestry did not name kin, a confusion on the moor that turned strangers gently, apologetically, back the way they came. And a thing Narcissa did not have a name for, that Cassiopeia's smoke writing called only the watch, which she understood to mean that the house itself would now keep an eye on the door, as Harry had watched his in the ruin, and would wake her wherever she slept if that eye ever saw something it did not like. On the 4th morning she stood in the walled garden with her ruined palm bandaged under her glove and looked at the grey house holding its 2 impossible children, and she made her plan, because a plan was the only prayer she knew how to say. She could not live here, that was the iron fact under everything. If Narcissa Malfoy vanished from the world would come looking, and the world coming to look was the one thing the wards could not survive. You cannot hide a house by hiding the woman who owns it, because a hidden woman is a shouted question. So she would not vanish, she would do the far harder thing. She would go back. She would go back to Malfoy Manor and be Lucius's clever wife and Draco's cold warm mother and the Ministry's plausible innocent. She would host the dinners and count the guests and manage the men who wanted things, and she would be, in every visible hour of her visible life, exactly the Narcissa Black the family had built. And in the seams of that life, in a morning stolen here, an afternoon lied for there, a night when Lucius traveled and Draco slept and the world assumed she was in her own bed, she would come north, through the confusion on the moor, past the watch, over the blood ward that knew her, into the one warm lit room where she got to be the other thing. The whole thing, the mother of 3 children, 2 of whom the world must never learn she loved. It was not sustainable. She knew that standing in the garden on the 4th morning, and she knew it every year after, and she did it anyway for 10 years, because the alternative was a cupboard under a stranger's stairs and a little girl in a ministry orphanage and a family that had learned nothing from all its beautiful dead. There would have to be a rhythm to it, and the rhythm would have to look, from the outside, like nothing at all. Nettle would hold the house on the days Narcissa could not come, and the mirror in the stone room would carry her face and voice north on the nights she was kept south, and the children would grow up knowing 2 things that could not both be spoken aloud in the same breath, that their mother loved them past the edge of sense, and that they must never, ever say her name where the wrong ear might catch it. She would teach them the second thing as she taught them their letters, patiently, early, before they were old enough to resent it. It was the cruelest lesson she would ever give, and it was the one that would keep them alive, and she made her peace with both of those facts in a walled garden gone to seed while the wind came off the moor and found the gaps in her good southern cloak. Lucius was the danger she could name. She spent the walk back through the wards deciding how to hold him. He would notice her absences eventually. He noticed everything. It was the engine of him. She would give the absences a shape he could file and forget. A great aunt's moldering property in the north that had fallen to her, tedious, unentailable, full of dry rot and drier deeds, that she was slowly and irritably setting in order because blacks did not let land go to strangers. It was even true, which was why it would hold. Lucius despised the north and distrusted the country, and would no more visit a damp moorland house of hers than he would sweep his own floors. He would let her have it as a rich man lets his wife keep a hobby that keeps her occupied and out of his study. She would let him think it cost her nothing but time. The rest she would manage as it came. She was, she reflected, walking down out of the heather toward the point where she could safely turn on her heel and be 100 miles south in the space of a breath, extremely good at managing things as they came. It was the whole of her inheritance. Her mother had left her no love and a great deal of technique, and Narcissa had decided, sometime in the last 4 nights, to spend the technique on the love as a soldier spends the enemy's own coin. She apparated home. She let herself into the west drawing-room where the sconce candles had gone back to their ordinary honest flame, because the mark that answered them was gray now and would be gray for a long time. She picked up the book she had left spine up on the 4th of November, the war's last night, and she found her place and read 3 lines and understood none of them and put it down again. "You've been away," Lucius said from the doorway. He had his traveling cloak over one arm. "Your aunt's ruin, my aunt's ruin," Narcissa agreed. "There is a room in it where the roof has given way onto 4 generations of correspondence. I spent 2 days deciding what to burn." He let him hear the boredom in it, laid it on like scent. "I'll need to go back repeatedly, I expect. It's a horror." "Sell it," Lucius said without interest. "I'll sell it when it's fit to sell," she said, and not to please the estate agent's convenience, which was the sort of black family stubbornness he found tiresome and completely convincing, and he made a small sound of husbandly surrender and went to kiss the top of her head on his way to his study, and the lie held. The first of 1,000. It held. That night when the house was down and dark, Narcissa went into the small stone room and took out the mirror that did not always show the room, and spoke a word to it that Cassiopeia's smoke had given her, and the glass cleared to show her the old hall at Corby House, 100 miles north. The banked fire, the tapestry with its 2 new gold names, and Nettle in her scrap of ancestral cloth sitting bolt upright between 2 cradles she had conjured from somewhere, keeping watch on 2 sleeping children with the ferocity of a thing that has finally, after 4 empty years, been given something to guard. Harry slept on his back with one fist thrown up beside his scarred head, still, even in sleep, half turned toward the door. Hermione slept curled around her chewed board book, brown hair everywhere, the tightness gone out of her small body at last, because for the first time since some gray town had misplaced her, she was inside walls that knew her name. Narcissa looked at them in the glass for a long time. She was not a woman given to weeping. Her mother had beaten the habit out of her before she was old enough to remember learning it, and what was left in its place was this. A stillness, a steadiness, a trick of holding a feeling so completely that it could not spill and could not be taken from her, and could not, most importantly, be read off her face by anyone who might use it. She held the sight of the 2 sleeping children that way now, as she had held the words "the child lives on the wars" last night, carefully, without seeming to hold it at all. Tomorrow, she told the glass and the elf and the children and the dead great-aunt who had known her better than her own mother ever had, I begin teaching you who you are. She went north with the first light, while Lucius still slept and the manor still believed her in it. Corby House smelled of wood smoke and porridge when she came in from the moor with the cold on her cloak. Nettle had the children up and fed and had put them, for reasons of her own, in matching gray wool that made them look like 2 small stones off a beach. Harry was standing at the low window on unsteady legs, one hand flat against the glass, watching a curlew work the heather. He turned when the door opened and considered Narcissa with James Potter's whole solemn attention, deciding something. Then he sat down hard on his backside, which appeared to be his method of getting anywhere quickly, and set off across the flagstones toward her at a determined crawl. She met him halfway. She always would. Hermione was slower to come because Hermione had found the shelf of Cassiopeia's picture books that Nettle had dusted and set out at a child's height, and Hermione had opinions about which of them was best and would not be hurried out of forming them. When she did come, it was with the chewed board book from the car park held out in both hands, the corner of it soft with a stranger's saliva and a stranger's nights, and she pushed it up at Narcissa and said the word again, the whole of her small vocabulary spent at once on the only offering she had. "Book, book," Narcissa agreed. She sat down on the cold floor in her traveling robes, which her mother would have called an impossibility and Cassiopeia would have called about time, and she gathered a child into the crook of each arm, and she opened the chewed board book to its first ruined page, and above them on the gray wall 2 threads of new gold caught the low northern light and held it, and she began to read. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Corby House. Harry was 5 that spring, or near enough, and he had worked out 3 important things about the world. The first was that the moor was bigger than anything. It went on past the wall and past the beck and past the place where the sheep track gave up, all the way to a line where the ground stopped and the sky started, and Nettle said that line was called the edge of the world and that only rude children tried to reach it. The second was that Hermione, who was 6 and had turned 6 in a proper way with a cake, knew the answer to almost every question a person could think of, and would tell you the answer whether you had asked for it or not, and would be cross if you had not listened. The third, and the one he held closest, was that on certain mornings the door opened and the cold air came in with a smell of somewhere else on it, and the woman he was allowed to call mother only inside these walls came home. She was home this morning, he knew before Nettle told him, because the whole house sat up when she crossed the threshold, the way a dog lifts its head, and the fire in the old hall burned a hand higher. Slowly, Nettle warned, but Harry was already going, down the passage on the flats of his feet because his boots were somewhere and finding them would cost him the good early minutes, and Hermione was ahead of him because Hermione had heard the door too and had a longer stride and no intention of being second to anything. Narcissa caught them both without appearing to brace for it, one child to each side, the cold of the outside still on her cloak. She held them a moment against the good wool. Then she set them back at arm's length and looked at them properly, which was a thing she did every visit, a slow accounting, hair and hands and knees and eyes, checking the sums of them against the last time. "You've a scab on your chin," she told Harry. "I fell off the wall," Harry said before he had decided whether this was information he wished to release. "He was being a hippogriff," Hermione said. "I told him hippogriffs have wings and he doesn't, and he said he'd find out, and then he found out." Narcissa's mouth did the thing it did, the thing that was not quite a smile because she did not spend smiles, only lent them. "And what did we learn? That Hermione's always right," Harry said, not sulking, stating the settled law of his universe, and Hermione looked so pleased with this that she forgot to be superior about it, which was the best version of her, and the three of them went into breakfast. This was the shape of the good mornings. Porridge with the dark honey Nettle got from somewhere she would not name. Narcissa at the head of the scrubbed kitchen table with her sleeves pushed up, which she never did anywhere else in her life, hearing the full report of the days she had missed. The lamb that had got its head stuck in the gate, the word Hermione had found in the big book that no one could pronounce, the dream Harry had about a motorbike in the sky that he could not explain and did not like to talk about, though he talked about it anyway, because Narcissa was the one person who did not tell him dreams were nothing. She said dreams were the mind tidying, and sometimes the mind found things while tidying that it had put away on purpose. She said it and moved on before he could ask what he might have put away, and he let her, because the moving on was part of the safety. They were not lonely children, though a stranger might have thought they should be. They had each other, which Narcissa had arranged as deliberately as she arranged everything, two of them so that neither would grow up the single-held object she had been, polished and displayed, and never once allowed to be ordinary. And they had Nettle, who loved them without measure and fed them without limit and told them stories at night that were mostly threats, about what happened to children who went past the wall, about the thing on the moor with too many joints that took the ones who called out after dark, and which set them shivering pleasantly and taught them under the shiver that this house would fight the whole world to keep them. What they did not have was any name to put on the shape of their lives. They knew they were blacks. They knew the moor and the house and the mother who came and went. They did not know that Harry had another name once, in a village he could not remember, or that the smell of somewhere else on Narcissa's cloak was the smell of a second family 200 miles south, or that the word mother was a loaded wand that must never be pointed anywhere but here. They knew only that they were happy in the plain animal way of well-fed children, and that on the mornings the door opened everything was, briefly, complete. It was Hermione who broke it that spring, though she did not mean to. Hermione broke most things by wanting to know them better. The top shelf in the old hall was forbidden, which meant that Hermione had thought about nothing else since she grew tall enough to see that it existed. The lower shelves were hers by right, Cassiopeia's picture books, and then the readers Narcissa brought, and then the true books, the ones with no pictures, that Hermione had climbed into at 4 and never climbed out of. But the top shelf, above the tapestry's lowest gold thread, held things bound in black and one thing bound in something that was not leather and that the firelight would not quite land on, and Nettle went stiff whenever a child so much as looked up at it. "Family things," Nettle said when pressed, "not for small hands, not for any hands but mistress's, and mistress does not touch them either, which is the wisest a person can be about them." This was, to Hermione, a challenge dressed as a warning. She waited for a day when Narcissa was south and Nettle was in the walled garden murdering slugs, and she built a tower of the kitchen stool on the reading chair on the fat hearth cushion, and she made Harry hold the bottom, because Harry could be relied on to hold the bottom of a bad idea he had been talked into and to take at least half the blame afterward without being asked. "It's too high," Harry said, holding. "It's exactly high enough," Hermione said from the top of it, which was not the same thing. She got 2 fingers on the spine of the book that was not leather. That was as far as she got. The book did not want to be got. It came off the shelf all at once, heavy and cold and eager, the way a thing is eager that has been waiting, and the tower of furniture went one way and Hermione went the other, and Harry, who had been holding the bottom, let go of the bottom and threw both arms up to catch the falling weight of her instead, which was the wrong physics and the right instinct, and they came down together in a heap of cushion and stool and old dark book. For a breath nobody moved. Then Hermione began to cry, which she almost never did, and Harry saw why. Her arm was not the shape an arm should be, just below the elbow, and she was holding it against herself and making a sound he had never heard her make. The book had fallen open between them. On its exposed page, ink that was not ink had begun, very slowly, to move. Harry did not look at the book. He looked at Hermione's arm, at the wrongness of it, at her face gone the color of porridge, and something happened in his chest that he had no word for, and would not have a word for until Narcissa gave him 1 year later. Every unlit candle in the old hall lit at once. The fire in the hearth stood straight up and turned white and roared, actually roared, and every pane of the deep old windows sang in its frame, and a wind that had no business being indoors picked up the fallen cushions and turned them once around the room and set them down. And the pain in Hermione's arm, she would swear to this for the rest of her life, and Narcissa would never fully explain it, eased, not gone, but held, cradled, as if a warm hand had closed around the hurt from the inside and would not let it be as bad as it wanted to be. Nettle came through the door at a dead run, took in the white fire and the singing glass and the 2 children on the floor, and did the only sensible thing anyone did that day. She went to the mirror in the passage, the twin of the one in the stone room far to the south, and she put her gray face to it, and she screamed one word into the glass: "Mistress." Narcissa came through the wards 11 minutes later, which was the fastest a human being had ever crossed from Wiltshire to that fold of the northern moor, and she came with her wand already out. The magic had gone out of the room by then, the way a wave goes out, leaving the evidence high on the beach. Every candle burned down to a stub, the fire ordinary and low, the glass still faintly humming. Harry sat on the floor with Hermione's head in his lap and Hermione's broken arm held very still across both their knees, and he was talking to her, low and constant, the sort of nonsense that is not nonsense. "You're all right, I've got you, she's coming, you're all right," and Hermione was letting him, which told Narcissa more than the arm did about how bad the arm was. She knelt. She did not gather Hermione up, because you do not lift a child by a broken thing. She ran her wand the length of the arm and read what it told her, and her face did not change, which was the face she wore when things were worst. "Clean break," she said to Hermione in the level voice she used for true things. "Both bones here, it will mend, I can take the pain and I can set it, but the setting will hurt for the length of one breath and then it will be over. Do you want it warned or sudden?" "Warned," Hermione said through her teeth. Even now, even like this, she wanted the information. "Warned on 3 then, 1, and she said it on 2 because that was the mercy," and Hermione's cry went up and cut off, and it was done. Then Narcissa did lift her, whole now or whole enough, and she sat back against the reading chair with a 6-year-old across her lap and a 5-year-old pressed to her side, and for a moment the strategist was not anywhere in the room. There was only a woman on the floor of a hidden house with 2 children breathing hard against her, and the fact, arriving late in total, of how nearly she had not been there. "The book bit her," Harry said into her shoulder. He had not cried, he had gone somewhere past crying, to the watchful place. "It jumped off the shelf, and then I did the thing, the candles, I didn't mean to. I know you didn't." Narcissa looked at the book, still open on the floor, its moving ink gone still now, sulking, denied its page. She would deal with the book. "You did the thing because she was hurt and you could not bear it, and the magic in you agreed with you and did what you could not do with your hands. That is not a fault, Harry. That is the oldest and best kind of magic there is, and one day I will teach you to do it on purpose. Today you did it by accident, and by accident you held her pain for her until I came." She pressed her mouth to the top of his head. "Thank you for holding the pain." He had no answer to that, so he took a fistful of her sleeve instead and held that. But the arm was set and the crisis was not over, because Narcissa had read something else off Hermione's arm that she did not say aloud. The break had gone into the growth of the bone. She could set what she could see. She could not be sure of what she could not, whether it had knit true, whether the arm would grow straight or grow wrong, whether a 6-year-old would go through life with a crook in her that a real healer could have prevented today, in the first clean hour, if a real healer had been standing where Narcissa was standing. And there was no healer she could bring. That was the wall she had built around these children, and now she stood inside it with a hurt child and understood the price of a wall. It keeps out the wolves and it keeps out the physicians, and it does not let you choose only one. She thought about it for the length of the afternoon while Hermione dozed against her with the arm splinted and Harry would not leave the door. She thought about the whole architecture of her hidden life, every ward and lie and forgery, the beautiful sealed box she had made. And she thought about a face she had not spoken to in 11 years, that had been scorched off a wall in Grimmauld Place when Narcissa was 14 and had learned that same night exactly how much a family would give up to stay pure. There was one healer in England she could trust with this. There was only one, and to reach her, Narcissa would have to do the second unforgivable thing of her adult life, which was to let another living soul through the door. Andromeda Tonks opened her own front door in a Muggle town at 9 in the evening with flour on her hands and a wand behind her ear, and found her sister on the step. They had not stood this close since they were girls. Narcissa watched the years go across Andromeda's face, the shock of the sight of her, then the older reflex, the wariness a burned-off daughter never quite loses, then something more complicated underneath both. Andromeda had their mother's cheekbones and none of their mother's cold. She had a smudge of flour on her jaw and a child's painting stuck to the door behind her with a charm, a purple horse with too many legs, and the whole warm, cluttered ordinariness of the life she had chosen over the family was there in the light behind her, the life they had all been taught to pity. "Sissy," Andromeda said just that. She did not ask how or why now or how dare you. She looked at her sister's face and she read it because they had been children in the same cold house and had learned to read faces before they learned to read words, and what she read made her reach out and take Narcissa by the wrist. "Someone's hurt, come in." "Not here," Narcissa's voice held, which cost her. "I need you to come to me, tonight. I need—" The word she needed was help, and she had not said it to another person since she was small, and it would not come. "I have a child with a broken arm set 6 hours ago by an amateur, and the break has gone into the bones growing, and I cannot bring a healer to her, and you are the only healer in the world I would let near her. I am asking you to come somewhere I cannot tell you the name of, to see a patient I cannot explain, and to ask me nothing until we are through the door. And I am asking you to trust that I would not stand on your step after 11 years for anything smaller than a child." Andromeda looked at her for a long moment. Behind her, a man's voice called something easy and domestic, Ted asking who was at the door, and Andromeda called back that it was work and she'd be out, and took her cloak off the hook. "You always did," she said, pulling it on, "ask for exactly the impossible thing and in exactly enough words that a person couldn't say no without becoming smaller than you. I'd forgotten that about you. Take my arm, show me where the wall is, and I'll trust you over it." Narcissa took her sister's arm and told her the secret of the location in 6 words that entered Andromeda and left the world, and turned them both north. Andromeda stopped just inside the door of the old hall and did not go further, because the tapestry had caught her. Narcissa watched her sister find her own scorched place on the wall, the ugly burn where a 14-year-old girl's face had been, and then follow the tree down, past Bellatrix, past the gap that had been Sirius until Sirius chose the wrong side of a war, down to the low branch where 2 threads of new gold sat among the gray dead. Andromeda read the 2 gold names. Narcissa watched her read them. She watched her sister's healer brain do the arithmetic that everyone with a memory for the family trees of England could do, and arrive and refuse to arrive and arrive anyway. "Sissy," Andromeda's voice had gone very careful. "That top name, Harry Arcturus, that's—" She stopped. She looked at Narcissa. "The Potter child died or vanished. The whole country's been told he vanished. Dumbledore's had people looking for 4 years. 3.5, Narcissa said. "And they will look for 11 more, and they will not find him because he is not lost. He is upstairs asleep with a picture book, and he is a black Trueborn by a right our great-aunt left me, and his cousin's arm is broken, and I did not bring you here to explain myself. I brought you to mend a child. Explanations are the price I'll pay after in full, whatever you ask. The child first." Something moved through Andromeda then that was too big for the careful voice to hold. She crossed the room and took her sister's face in both flour-dusted hands, the first time anyone had touched Narcissa's face with tenderness since Cassiopeia died, and she said, "You stole the boy who lived out from under Albus Dumbledore and raised him in secret on a moor, you, the one of us who did everything right." Her eyes were bright. "I have spent 11 years believing I was the only black who ever chose a person over the name. Show me the child, Sissy. Show me both of them. God, show me both of them." The mending took Andromeda an hour, and she did it well because she was better than good, and when it was finished Hermione's arm would grow as straight as the other. Andromeda sat on the edge of the bed afterward with her patient's uninjured hand in hers and asked her what she was reading, and Hermione, who did not warm to strangers, told her at length with diagrams, and Andromeda listened as though there were nothing in the world she would rather hear. And a second adult came, that night, permanently, into the small circle of people who would die before they let these children be taken. Harry watched the newcomer from the doorway for most of the hour before he decided about her. What decided him was that she did not once look at his forehead. Everyone who was going to be a problem, he would learn over the years, looked at his forehead first, at the thin, pale line he was made to keep hidden under a fringe and on outings under a charm. The problem people's eyes went there and snagged. Andromeda's eyes went to his eyes and stayed and asked him without words how he was holding up one watcher to another. He came the rest of the way into the room. "You have my cousin's hair," he told her, meaning Hermione, whose hair was everywhere on the pillow. "I have my daughter's hair," Andromeda said. "Well, my daughter's hair when it's being brown, it isn't always. Would you like to meet her? She's a menace. You'd like her enormously." Nymphadora Tonks was 12 and could make her nose into a pig's snout, and this settled the question of whether the newcomers were to be trusted more thoroughly than any amount of adult reassurance. She came the next school holiday, and the one after, smuggled north under her mother's arm through the wards that now knew the Tonks' blood as kin. She was loud in a house that had never been loud, and she broke a vase and mended it wrong so that it was funnier than before, and she taught Harry to fall off things without doing himself an injury, which was the single most useful skill anyone ever gave him. And she let Hermione interrogate her about Metamorph Moggy for an entire wet afternoon, and answered every question with the patience of an older cousin who remembered being an insufferable know-it-all herself. She brought the outside in with her, which no one else could. Ted Tonks came once at the very end of a holiday, a broad, kind, Muggle-born man who took one look at the tapestry, at the scorch where his wife had been burned off her own family, and said only, "Well, they missed." "She's still here," and then sat on the kitchen floor and taught Harry a card game that involved a great deal of cheating and no magic whatsoever, and Harry, who had grown up among people who guarded every word, laughed until Nettle came to see what had broken. It was the first time the house had heard a man laugh in it since before Cassiopeia died. Narcissa, watching from the passage, made a note that she would need to be careful of Ted, because Ted was the kind of good that made a person forget to be watchful, and forgetting to be watchful was a luxury she could not yet let anyone in this house afford. "You're both weird," Nymphadora told the children on her last night, lying upside down off the reading chair with her hair cycling through the colors of a bruise, in the good way. "The way that means you'll be all right. It's the normal children you have to worry about. They break when the world pushes them. Weird ones just push back." Narcissa, who came north oftener now that there was help to make the oftener possible, watched a family assemble itself in her great-aunt's forgotten house and did not entirely trust it, because she had been raised to distrust anything that felt like enough, but she let it assemble. That was the growth in her, the thing the children were doing to her without knowing, teaching her, a lesson at a time, to let good things stand without immediately calculating how they would be taken away. They would be taken away, of course. She never stopped believing that. She simply learned to enjoy them first. The lessons about how to enjoy them were interrupted in the autumn of that year by an owl. The owl came to Malfoy Manor, which was the wrong place for it, and therefore the frightening place for it. Narcissa was at the long table going over the season's invitations with Lucius, being the wife the world could see, when the ministry owl came down the great window and rapped, and a house elf brought the letter on a salver, and Lucius, who opened everything because everything at Malfoy Manor was in some sense his, slit it and read it and frowned. "Curious," he said. "It's addressed to you, Department for the Regulation and Control of Underage Magic, a records matter." He held it out, already losing interest, because a records matter was beneath him. "They want to confirm a household return. Something about a minor in your care flagged some years ago. A clerical thing. Your aunt's estate, no doubt. Old houses breed old paperwork." Narcissa took the letter with a hand that betrayed nothing and read it in a single sweep, and understood, in that sweep, exactly how close the wall had come to cracking. Years ago, in a grey town in the Midlands, a 2-year-old had frosted every window on a July afternoon, and a Muggle children's home had written it in a ledger as a fault in the glass, and a junior clerk at the ministry, following procedure, had opened a file. That file had sat. Files sit for years. But files are also swept periodically by clerks who want to close cases before an audit, and some diligent unfortunate had pulled the Frost in July file, found that the flagged child had been removed from the home by a woman whose paperwork, on a second and more careful look, did not entirely agree with itself, and traced the trail of that paperwork, through 3 forged agencies and 2 dead letter addresses, to the one real name Narcissa had been forced to leave anywhere in the chain. The solicitor of the Black Estate, who handled Cassiopeia's affairs and hers, they did not know anything. That was the first thing she made herself understand, reading it a second time under Lucius's incurious eye. They did not know Hermione existed as a Black. They knew only that a flagged Muggle child had been collected years ago by someone connected, at 3 removes, to the Black Estate, and they wanted, in the deadening language of the department, to confirm the household return, to know where the child had gone and under what registration, so a box could be ticked and a file closed. An unticked box was nothing. An unticked box that a diligent clerk decided to chase was the end of everything. "You've gone somewhere," Lucius observed for the second time in 4 years. "I'm irritated," Narcissa said, which was allowed, because irritation was the emotion a woman of her station was permitted to display over paperwork. "My great-aunt, in her infinite consideration, appears to have taken in some Muggle foundling as a charity case before she died, one of her causes. You know how the old women get, all almshouses and orphans once the marriage market's closed to them, and neglected to file a single form about it, and now the ministry wishes me to account for a child I never met who is very probably long since dead of the measles. I shall have to write them a tedious letter." It was a good lie because it was mostly true and entirely boring, and boredom was the safest thing to be at Malfoy Manor. Lucius made a sound of aristocratic contempt for the ministry's small-mindedness and returned to the invitations. Narcissa wrote the tedious letter that night, and it was a masterpiece of the tedious arts. In it, Madame Malfoy regretted to inform the department that the foundling in question had been in the care of the late Cassiopeia Black, that the child had sadly not thrived, and that the relevant particulars had been recorded with the family's solicitor and were available for inspection at the department's convenience by written appointment, which the department, faced with the prospect of actual work over a closed almshouse case 8 years cold, would never make. She sealed it with the Malfoy crest because the Malfoy crest opened doors and closed files, and she sent it south to a clerk who wanted only to go home. Then she went to her solicitor, an old dry man who had served the Blacks for 40 years, and asked exactly as many questions as he was paid to ask, which was none, and she put into his hands a set of documents she had spent the last of the night forging, so that if any department official ever did make the written appointment, the file at the solicitor's would agree with the letter down to the last comma. A Muggle foundling, Cassiopeia Black's charity, deceased, closed. She paid him what silence costs. She trusted the paper more than the man, and the wards more than the paper, and herself more than any of it, which was the whole grim architecture of how she had kept 2 children alive. The box was ticked, the file was closed. It had cost her a night's sleep and a forger's evening, and 1 more year off the far end of her nerves, and it had held. But she stood in the stone room at Malfoy Manor as the sky grayed, with the copy of the tedious letter in her hand, and she understood the thing the arm had begun to teach her and the owl had finished. The wall was not a fortress. It was a dike, and she was the whole of the sea defense, one woman with her thumb in every leak, and the sea was not going away. It would find the frost in July file and the growth of a bone and a dozen leaks she had not yet imagined, 1 a year for years, and she would have to be standing exactly here, thumb ready every single time. Andromeda had lightened the load. Andromeda could not carry the sea. She went north the next morning anyway, because the alternative to standing at the dike was not standing at the dike, and she had chosen on the wars last night which of those women she was going to be. She began that winter to teach them in earnest, because the owl had shown her they could not afford to grow up ignorant of either the magic in them or the name on them. The magic came first, and it came because of the candles. Harry had not forgotten the day the hall lit itself. He had dreams about it, of a white fire standing up where a fire should lie down, and he woke from them not shaking but very still, listening, the watchful place. Narcissa found him at it one night, 6 years old and awake at the cold end of the house, looking at an unlit candle on the passage sill in case it went off again without asking him. "You don't trust it," she said. She did not phrase it as a comfort. She rarely did. Comfort that lied was worse than none. It did what I didn't tell it to. Yes. She sat down on the cold floor beside him, in the good robes she still had not changed out of, and set the candle between them. "That is what wild magic is. It lives in you, and when you are pushed past what your hands can do, it acts without you, and it does not always act small. It saved Hermione's arm from being worse. It could, another day, do harm you never meant. Both of those are true, and flinching from it will not choose between them. Only this will." She held her wand loosely, not pointing it, letting him see it was resting. "Learning to ask it instead of waiting for it to answer a question you screamed by accident. Watch." She did not incant. She looked at the candle and wanted it plainly as you want a door to open, and the wick took a bead of flame and held it, steady, ordinary, obedient. "Now you," she said, "not with the wand. You're too young for the wand, and this is older than wands anyway. Want it, don't shout at it. Want it as you wanted Hermione not to hurt." Harry looked at the wick. He thought about Hermione's arm, the wrong shape, and the something in his chest that had no name, and he took hold of the memory of it and turned it carefully from a scream into a request. The candle guttered, went out entirely, then lit small, blew at the root, wavering but lit in his, and asked for. Behind them, Hermione, who had crept out of bed to see what the fuss was and had said nothing for once in her life, let out a breath. "That's not fair," she said. "I've read 3 books on it and I can't make a spark." "You will," Narcissa said. "You'll make it work because you understand it, and Harry will make it work because he feels it, and the 2 of you will spend the rest of your lives each convinced the other one gets there by the wrong road. That is also a kind of family magic." She rose and left them the candle. "Practice, both ways. Neither of you is allowed to be best at everything, and I will not referee." The lesson of the name started with the tapestry. She stood them in front of it one dark afternoon with the fire high, Harry 6 now and Hermione 7, and she did not lecture because you could not lecture Hermione who would outfact you, and you could not lecture Harry who would go politely blank and remember nothing. Instead she told them a story, and she made the tapestry help. "This is the House of Black," she said, "and it is very old, and it has done a very great deal of harm." That got them. They had expected a boast. Every story anyone had ever begun about a great family began with a boast. This one began with harm, and both children turned to look at her instead of the wall. "Look here." She touched the scorch where Andromeda's face had been. "My sister, your Aunt Dromeda, who mended your arm, Hermione. The family burned her off this wall when she was younger than you'll be at Hogwarts because she married a man they thought was beneath us. Here, the gap that had been serious. My cousin. He is in a prison called Azkaban, and the family counts it a blessing, and I am not sure the family is right. Regulus, a gray unburned name gone out too young. His brother, who died at 18 doing something brave that no one will ever thank him for because he did it in secret and the secret died with him. Her hand moved among the dead like a woman walking a churchyard she knew by heart. Bellatrix, my other sister. She loved the family so much and so wrongly that she is in the cell next to Sirius's now, and she counts it an honor. That is what the family can do to a person who loves it without thinking. It can make them into her. Why are you telling us the bad ones? Harry asked. Because everyone else will tell you the good ones, Narcissa said. The world will tell you the blacks are the last pure thing in a spoiled country, and it will be lying, and you will need to know it is lying because you are blacks now, and the lie will come dressed as your own family's love. So I am giving you the truth first while you are small enough to keep it. The blacks are fierce and clever and loyal past sense, and they have burned their own children off the wall for the crime of loving wrongly, and all of that is in your blood now, the good and the rot together, because I put it there. On purpose, because the good was worth the rot to me. She looked down at them. Do you understand any of that? No, said Harry. A bit, said Hermione. You mean we get to choose which kind of black to be? Narcissa was quiet a moment. The fire moved. Yes, she said. That is exactly what I mean. That is the whole of what I mean, and it took me 30 years to learn it, and you've had it at 7. Look at the wall once more. Look low. They looked low to the branch that everyone had thought was ended, where 2 threads of gold sat bright among the gray. Harry Arcturus, Hermione Cassiopeia. Their own names worked in gold, joined to the tree by a light that had not dimmed since the night it was made. Those are yours, Narcissa said. The house knows you in the marrow. It will hide you and it will help you, and one day, if I have done this right, it will answer you, but it does not own you. Remember which of those is which, and you will be the good kind, and I will not have wasted the rot. Hermione reached up on her toes and put one finger very lightly on her own gold name as she touched everything she meant to memorize. Harry reached up and put his finger not on his own name but on the scorch where Andromeda had been, the burned place, the harm, and left it there, and did not explain why, and Narcissa did not ask because she thought she understood, and because some things a child needs to keep unexplained in order to keep them at all. That was the winter the lessons began. Letters and numbers and the plain magic of a household from Nettle, the great cold library and the discipline of wanting to know from Hermione's own hunger, and from Narcissa on the mornings the door opened, the harder curriculum. Who they were, what the name cost, how to stand in a room and give it nothing. How to love in a house where love was a secret weapon and hold it, and not let it be read off your face by anyone who might use it. Harry learned that last one slowest, because it went against the whole grain of him, and Narcissa did not try to cure him of the resistance. She did not want to raise another black who could not be read. She wanted to raise one who could choose, moment by moment, whether to be read or not, and she could see already that Harry would spend his openness like a rich man on the few and close like a vault to the rest, and that Hermione would stand at his shoulder doing the sums he was too warm to do, and that between the two of them they might make one whole safe person out of the ruin the family had handed her. She came out of the old hall that night into the cold passage where the mirror hung, and she looked back once through the doorway. The fire was low. Nettle had the children on the hearthrug, one on each side of her, and she was telling them the one about the thing on the moor with too many joints, and Hermione was correcting the number of joints, and Harry was watching the dark window in case the thing had opinions about being miscounted, and the 2 gold names on the wall above them caught the last of the firelight and gave it back. Narcissa stood in the cold and watched the warm, which was the whole geometry of her life, and for once she did not calculate how it would be taken from her. She simply let it be there, the assembled improbable family in the forgotten house, and then she turned the mirror to carry her face south, and went back to the other life, and closed the door on this one with the particular care of a woman who has finally understood what she has to lose. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The names on the wall. By the time Harry was 9, he could disarm his cousin 4 times in 10, which Hermione considered a scandal against the natural order, and which Andromeda considered the single most encouraging thing she had seen in years. They dueled in the long barn behind the walled garden, where the wards were thickest and the noise went nowhere. Andromeda ran the lessons when she could get north, because Andromeda had been a duelist before she was a mother and had never entirely put it down, and because Narcissa, who could have taught them, had decided early that she would not be the one to teach these children to fight. She would teach them to hide, to lie, to hold a room and give it nothing. Someone else would have to teach them to raise a wand, so that if the day ever came when hiding failed, they would not be soft. Again, Andromeda said. And this time, Harry, stop telling me what you're going to do with your face before you do it with your wand. Hermione reads you like a menu. I do not read him like a menu. You knew he was going for the disarm before he'd finished the wand movement. Don't argue, it's a compliment, it means you're paying attention. Harry blank, show me blank. Harry went blank. It cost him something every time. Going blank was the opposite of everything he was, and Narcissa had told him once that this was precisely why it would save his life someday, because no one would ever believe a face as open as his had learned to lie. He held the blankness and he moved, and Hermione, reading the menu that was no longer there, guarded the wrong quarter, and his disarming charm took her wand cleanly out of her hand and into his. 5 and 10, Hermione's chin came up. That, she announced, was luck, and had her wand back in her stance set before the sentence was finished, and the next exchange went 9 passes deep, the two of them circling in the barn dust, and it was not luck at all on either side, and Andromeda leaned against the door-post and watched 2 9-year-olds move like something out of a story she had not dared believe she would live to see, and did not stop them, because some lessons a person should be allowed to win. Afterward, breathing hard, the wand set down, they lay in the barn straw, and Hermione asked the question she had been building toward for a month. Why do we have to be able to fight? She said it to the rafters. Nobody comes here. Nobody knows the house is here. You've all told us 100 times nobody can find us, so who are we learning to fight? Harry beside her went very still, because Harry had wanted to ask the same thing for longer than a month and had not been brave enough, which was a strange thing to discover about yourself when everyone had always told you that brave was the one thing you certainly were. Andromeda was quiet for a moment. Then she said carefully, in the voice the adults all used when they were deciding how much of a true thing a child was old enough to hold, "Ask your mother, not because I won't tell you. Because it's hers to tell, and she'll tell you when she can, and it will be soon now. You're nearly old enough for the whole of it." She got up and brushed the straw off. "Come in, it's getting dark, and I don't like you on this side of the wall after dark, neither of you, not tonight especially." "Why not tonight especially?" Hermione said, catching it at once, because Hermione caught everything. "Because I said," Andromeda told her, which from Andromeda meant there's a reason and you are not getting it, and both children heard the difference and came in. The wand work was Andromeda's. The other work, the work that had no wand in it, was Narcissa's alone. She called it holding because occlumency was a word that came with a great deal of forbidding machinery attached, and she wanted them to have the thing before they had the dread of the word. She sat them down one at a time that autumn in the cold library with the door shut, and she looked into their eyes, and gently, without force, she went in. The first time she did it to Hermione, Hermione's whole cluttered, brilliant mind lay open like a book left face up on a table. The ward theory she'd been reading, the newspaper she had not yet found but would, 100 half-finished questions, and under all of it, unguarded, the warm animal fact of how much she loved the people in this house and how much of her, always under the cleverness, still braced each night against being sent back to the gray town she could not quite remember. Narcissa withdrew at once. She had seen enough to know the danger. "Someone did that to you just now," she said. "I did. I walked into your thoughts through your eyes and I read them. There are wizards in the world who can do it. 1 or 2 you will meet, if the day comes that I send you out among them, and they do not ask, and they are not gentle, and they will take from behind your eyes anything you have not learned to hold. A man could look at you across a room, Hermione, and learn your true name and mine and the location of this house, and you would never feel the theft unless you learned to hold." "How?" Hermione had gone pale, which was the right response, and then she had reached for a quill, which was the wrong one. "Not with notes. This is the one thing in your life you cannot read your way into. You hold by building a room in your mind, or a wall, or a cold nothing, whatever shape your mind will keep, and you put the true things behind it, and you leave out front only what a bored, ordinary child would be thinking. You already know how. You watched Harry do it in the barn with his face. This is the same discipline, turned inward. Blank, show me blank from the inside." Hermione built a library. Of course she built a library. She stood in the doorway of an imagined reading room and shut the true books in the back and left a dull primer open on the front table. And when Narcissa went in again, she found a girl thinking laboriously about the rules of gobstones and nothing else, and behind that wall the whole of the real Hermione held. Harry could not build a room. Harry had no rooms in him. He was weather, all of it out on the surface where anyone could stand in it. What Harry learned instead, and it took him a year, longer than was safe, and Narcissa counted every month of the delay, was to flood. When she went into Harry's mind, he gave her so much surface, so much noise, so much bright, ordinary, boyish nothing, lambs and the stuck gate and a dream about a flying motorbike, that the true things sank underneath it out of reach, hidden not behind a wall but in the depth of the water, and a reader who went in came out soaked and empty-handed and quietly certain there was nothing there worth the swim. 2 roads again, Narcissa said, when they could both do it, when she could look into either of them and find only what they chose to show her. She hides the treasure in a locked room. You hide it at the bottom of the sea. And a man who has learned to pick locks all his life will break himself against her walls, and a man who has learned to read walls will drown in your open water, and neither of you will ever tell him he was in the wrong ocean. She took the old black signet from the chain at her throat, the ring she had pressed into the wax of her own blood the night she made them, and she let them each hold it once and feel the low answering warmth it gave to a hand the house knew. "This knows you, the wards know you, but no ward and no ring can guard the inside of your own head, that you guard yourselves. From now on, every visit I will try to get in, and one day I will fail every time, and on that day you will be ready for the men who do not ask." Hermione found the newspaper in November in the wrong place, which was how she found most of the things that mattered. The library at Corby House was a cold, high room that Cassiopeia had filled over 90 years, and Narcissa had been quietly weeding ever since, removing a shelf at a time, the volumes she did not want two children to grow up inside. She could not remove everything. There was too much of it, and some of it hid. And so on a wet afternoon, Hermione, hunting a book on ward theory that Andromeda had mentioned, pulled out a fat volume of collected magic and found, pressed flat inside the back cover where someone had left it a decade before and forgotten it, a single yellowed page of the Daily Prophet. She read it standing at the shelf. She read it twice because Hermione did not trust a thing she had only read once. Then she carried it to the window where the light was better and read it a third time, and Harry, coming to find her for supper, saw her face and stopped in the doorway. "What is it?" "It's from years ago," Hermione said. She did not look up. "November 1981. Listen." Celebrations continued across the country this week as the wizarding world marked 1 month since the fall of He Who Must Not Be Named. Name of the child credited with the Dark Lord's defeat, the so-called boy who lived, has become a byword for hope in every household. Yet mystery surrounds the infant's whereabouts. Ministry sources confirm that young Harry Potter, orphaned in the attack that ended the war, has not been placed with any known guardian, and speculation continues as to. She stopped. She looked up, and there was a thing working behind her eyes that she was too honest to hide and too unsure of to speak. "Harry Potter, that's almost your name, Harry." The candle on the sill, the one Harry had learned to light 3 years ago and now lit without thinking whenever a room went dim around him, flickered, though there was no draft, and his scar hurt. It had never hurt before. It had itched in cold weather. It had been a thing he was made to keep hidden, a pale line under his fringe that Mother sealed with a charm before the rare outings, and that he had learned not to touch in front of Nettle because it made her cry. But it had never hurt, and now, standing in the cold library while Hermione read the name Harry Potter off a 10-year-old page, it woke. A thin hot line drawn quick across his forehead and gone there and gone, so fast he might have imagined it. He did not imagine it. He had spent his whole life learning to watch, and he watched the pain arrive and leave, and he knew it was real, and he knew, in the animal way that runs ahead of thought, that it and the name on the page were somehow the same thing. He did not tell Hermione about the pain. He told her the other true thing. "Don't ask Mother about it in front of anyone," he said. "Even Nettle, especially the name." Hermione, who argued with everything, did not argue with that. She folded the page along its old creases and gave it to him, because it was more his than hers, though neither of them could have said why, and Harry put it inside his shirt against his skin where the scar could not see it, and they went in to supper and were quiet in a way the adults noticed and pretended not to. That night Narcissa, alerted by a look Nettle gave her across the kitchen, went up to Harry's room and found him awake, the folded page on the blanket, and she sat down on the edge of the bed and picked it up and read it, and her face did the worst thing, which was nothing at all. "I've been waiting for one of you to find one of these," she said at last. "I thought I'd got them all. I should have known better than to think I could out-tidy Hermione." She set the page down. "You're 9. I promised myself I'd tell you the whole of it when you were 11, and I'm going to keep that promise, because 11 is when the world starts pulling at children like you, and you'll need the truth to pull back with. But I'll tell you one true thing tonight, because you're owed something for finding it yourself." She looked at him steadily. "That name is yours. It was yours before I gave you mine. And the reason we hide, the reason for the wall and the wards and the second name and all of it, is that a great many people in the world want the child in that story very badly, some to worship him and some to use him and at least want to finish what he started, and I decided before you could walk that you would grow up a person before you ever had to be a story. That's the whole of what I'll say tonight. Can you hold it and not chase the rest for 2 more years?" "Someone wants to finish what he started," Harry said, not a question. He had heard the shape of the important sentence in the middle of all the others. He always did. "The one from the story, the dark one, he's not gone." Narcissa was quiet for the length of 3 breaths. "No," she said, because she had promised herself on the wars last night that she would not raise a child on comfortable lies. "I don't believe he is. And when you are 11, I will tell you everything I know about why, and everything I have done to keep you from him, and you will find that it is a great deal, and that you have never for 1 hour of your life been unguarded. But not tonight. Tonight you sleep, and you let me carry it, because that is still my job for 2 more years, and I am very good at my job." She touched his forehead over the hidden line with one cool finger, and the ache that had been threatening all evening lay down under her hand and was still. "Sleep, Harry." He slept. She sat with him until he did, and then she went and stood a long time in front of the tapestry, looking at his gold name and the faded one above it that the world had lost, and she began, that night, to make the arrangements for a hunt she had felt coming for a year, and could no longer pretend was not almost here. The hunt had a name, and the name was Alastor Moody, and Narcissa heard it first at her own dinner table from her own husband, which was the ministry's idea of a joke it did not know it was making. Lucius was contemptuous over the soup. Dumbledore's got Moody crawling over half the old registered estates in the north on some errand of his own. Diggory in the department has been complaining about it for a fortnight. It's not sanctioned, it's the old man calling in favors, but no one will tell Alastor Moody to stop doing a thing once he's decided it wants doing. He broke bread. It's the Potter business again. 10 years and he still won't let it lie. He's convinced the child's alive and hidden, and every few years he sets the dogs on the pureblood houses on the theory that if anyone stole the boy who lived it was one of us. A thin sound of amusement, as if any of us would want the liability. Imagine keeping that under your roof. Imagine, Narcissa said and reached for the salt, and her hand did not shake because she had spent 30 years teaching it not to. She learned the rest in the days after, from the Malfoy world intelligence that flowed to her precisely because everyone assumed she was ornamental. Moody was working outward from the registered black properties, Grimmauld Place empty and sealed, the vault houses in the south, the mouldering pile in Yorkshire that had gone to a cousin. He was thorough and he was tireless, and he had an eye, a true magical eye that saw through invisibility and through walls, and the rumor went through some concealment charms that had held against everything else. Corby House was on no registry. Moody could not find a house that did not exist to be found. But Moody did not work from registries alone. Moody worked from patterns, from the shape of what was missing, and a man who hunts long enough for a hidden thing learns to feel the hole where it has been hidden. And there was the confusion ward. It was old and it was good, and it had turned 100 wandering shepherds and one persistent ministry census taker gently back the way they came, none of them ever aware they had been turned. But it worked by touching the mind of the one it turned, and a magical eye is not a mind, and Narcissa did not know no one knew, because no one had ever tested Cassiopeia's wards against Alastor Moody, whether the eye would feel the ward reach for a mind that was half glass and think, there is a thing here that does not want me to look at it. She could not risk finding out with the children on the wrong side of the wall. She went north and she gathered them and she told them in the level voice the shape of the danger without its name. A man might come near the moor, a man who could see things other men could not. They were not to go past the wall, either of them, for any reason, until she told them the man was gone. If they saw a stranger, they were to come to the house and to Nettle and to the mirror and to nothing else. She made them repeat it. She made them repeat it twice. Hermione, who resented being managed, did not resent this, because Hermione had done the arithmetic on Andromeda's not tonight especially, and had been waiting for exactly this conversation. And if he finds us anyway, Hermione asked, if he gets past the wall, he won't, but if... Narcissa looked at the two of them, 9 years old, standing in the old hall under their own gold names, and she made the decision she had been circling for a year, which was to trust them with a piece of their own defense. Then you give him nothing, she said. Everything I have taught you about holding a room, about the blank face, about answering a question with a question, that is what it was for, not for dinner parties, for this. If a stranger ever stands in front of you and asks who you are two black children who live here with your great-aunt's old elf. You have always lived here, you do not know what he means by any other name, and you want to go home, because a child who only wants to go home is the least interesting thing in the world to a man hunting a hidden weapon. You bore him, you confuse him, you give him a headache and a dead end, and you get to Nettle, and Nettle gets to me. Can you do that? Yes, said Harry, who had been going blank in the barn all autumn and now understood at last what the blankness had been a rehearsal for. Yes, said Hermione, but I want to know his name, and Narcissa almost smiled because that was the whole of Hermione, wanting the enemy's name before the battle so she could look him up afterward, and it was going to make her one day magnificent and impossible in exactly equal measure. His name is Moody, Narcissa said, giving her the one gift she could. Alastor Moody, when this is over you may read everything the library has on him, which is nothing, because men like him do not leave records, and you will have to be content with that, and it will drive you to distraction, and it will be good practice for the rest of your life. They saw him on the 4th day, and they saw him because Harry could not, in the end, stop being Harry. They had kept to the house for 3 days, which for 2 active children on a moor was a small eternity, and on the 4th the rain broke and the light came out clean over the wet heather, and a lamb got itself over the wall and down toward the beck and began to cry in the particular way that meant it was stuck, and Harry, who had grown up on the moor and could not bear a stuck thing crying, was over the wall after it before Hermione could catch his sleeve. She went after him rather than let him go alone, which was the entire architecture of the two of them in a single decision. They got the lamb. It had wedged its head in the fork of a fallen branch, and it took both of them in a great deal of Hermione's opinion about the intelligence of sheep, and they were laughing, wet to the knees, the freed lamb bolting uphill, when Harry's scar drew its thin hot line across his forehead, and this time did not stop. He put his hand up to it. He could not help it. And a voice behind them, graveled, unhurried, said, "Now that's an interesting thing for a boy to do." He stood at the bottom of the slope by the beck where no one had been a moment before, a big battered man with a face like a cliff that had lost several arguments, one ordinary eye and one that was bright blue and round and moving all the time, and it was fixed now on Harry's forehead, on the hand Harry had pressed to it, and it did not move away. Hermione stepped half in front of Harry. She did it without appearing to do it, drifting a quarter step, a girl shifting her weight, and she put on her face the exact blank pleasant nothing Narcissa had drilled into them, and she said, in a child's bored voice, "We're not allowed to talk to strangers. Our aunt says." Sensible aunt. The blue eye stayed on Harry. The ordinary one moved to Hermione and weighed her and found her, she could tell, more difficult than a 9-year-old had any business being, which was itself a mistake she had made, being too smooth, and she corrected it at once by wiping her nose on her wet sleeve like the child she was pretending to be. "And what's your aunt's name then, sensible girl?" "I'm not allowed to say." "No, course not." He came a step closer up the slope, slow, favoring one leg. The blue eye had not left Harry. "Your friend there, he's got a headache, right about there." A blunt finger rose and pointed, not at Harry's face but at the exact spot under the fringe where the sealed line lay hidden, where no eye should have been able to see it, and Harry felt the cold of being seen go through him, and the scar answered the pointing finger with a spike of pain that whited the edges of the moor for a heartbeat. This was the moment. He knew it was the moment. Everything Mother had built, the wall and the wards and 10 years of lies, came down to whether a 9-year-old with a burning forehead could give a legendary or nothing while being looked at by an eye that saw through walls. He could not do the blank. The pain would not let him hold the blank. So he did the other thing, the Harry thing, the thing that was not in any of Narcissa's lessons and that saved them precisely because it was not. He stopped fighting the pain and let his face do what his face wanted, which was to crumple, and he burst into tears. Not brave tears, not noble tears. The loud, wet, undignified howling of a small child with a headache who has been cornered by a frightening stranger by a beck, and he grabbed Hermione's arm and wailed, "I want to go home, I want Nettle, I don't like him," and made himself as uninteresting, as ordinary, as thoroughly not a hidden weapon as it is possible for a human being to be, because the one thing a hunter cannot use is a crying child who wants his nanny. Hermione did not miss a beat. She rounded on Moody with the pure indignation of a girl whose friend has been made to cry. "Now look what you've done. He gets headaches, everyone knows he gets headaches, and you've made him cry, and I'm telling our aunt a horrible man by the beck did it." She got her arm around Harry and turned him uphill. "We're going home, don't follow us. Our aunt does magic and she doesn't like strangers." And they went, the two of them, a wailing boy and a furious girl, stumping up the wet slope toward the wall, and every line of them screamed nothing here but children. And the hardest thing Harry ever did in those years was to keep crying, keep it loud and childish and real, all the way up the hill with that blue eye burning a hole between his shoulder blades, and not once look back to see if the man believed them. The man did not believe them. That was the thing they only understood later. Alastor Moody had spent 40 years not believing people, and he did not believe a crying boy on a moor near a house that his eye could not quite fix, that shimmered and slid whenever he tried to hold it, that was there and not there in a way he had felt exactly twice before in his life, and both times there had been something hidden worth hiding. He stood by the beck and watched 2 children vanish over a wall into a shimmer, and he did not believe them at all. But not believing is not knowing, and a man cannot report a shimmer, and there was no house on any map, and the child had a headache and cried for his nanny. And Alastor Moody had learned the hard way over 40 years that a hunter who moves on a feeling with no house behind it ends his career explaining to a tribunal why he tore the wards off an old woman's croft and found 2 ordinary orphans and an elf. He wrote it in his book. Anomaly he wrote in his cramped hand. Northumberland Moor, grid ref uncertain, concealment probable, insufficient. He circled it. He would come back. Men like Moody always come back. But he went for now, and that was all the children had to buy, and they had bought it. One of them with a lie smoother than any 9-year-old should own, and the other with the truth of his own tears. Narcissa reached them inside the wall, summoned by Nettle in the mirror, and she went down on her knees in the wet grass and held them both and ran the accounting, hair and hands and knees and eyes, and when she got to Harry's eyes she stopped. "You cried at him," she said. "I couldn't do the blank." Harry's voice was raw, the crying real enough now that it needed no performing. "My head, when he pointed my head, I couldn't hold it, so I cried instead. I made myself the most boring thing I could think of." He looked up at her, streaked and shaking. "Did I ruin it?" Narcissa took his face in both hands. "You saved it," she said, and there was something in her voice the children had never heard, a roughness under the level, the sound of a woman setting down a weight she has carried so long she had stopped feeling it. "Do you understand what you did? I taught you to give a hunter a blank wall, and a blank wall is a thing a man like Moody has broken 100 times. You gave him something no training could have taught you and nothing in the world can break. You gave him a real child. He came looking for a weapon and he found a boy crying for his nanny, and there's no lever in all his 40 years of hunting that fits a boy crying for his nanny." She pressed her forehead to his, careful of the scar. "Your openness, the thing I could never train out of you, and thanked every star I couldn't. It was the only key that would have turned that lock. You did that. Not the blank I gave you, the Harry I didn't." Then she turned to Hermione, who was standing very straight and very pale, and who said, before Narcissa could speak, "I was too good. At the start, I answered too well. I saw him clock it. I made him more interested, not less. Harry fixed it. I made it worse, and Harry fixed it." Her chin was up, but her mouth was not steady. I've read 40 books on how to be invisible, and I nearly got us caught by being clever, and Harry got us out by being sad. Yes, Narcissa said, because Hermione would not have forgiven a comforting lie any more than Harry would. You did make it worse at the start. You were too smooth, and he is exactly the kind of man who notices smooth. And you learned that in the field at 9 against Alastor Moody, and survived the lesson, which is more than most grown wizards can say. She reached out and tucked a wet strand of hair behind Hermione's ear, a plain small gesture that undid the straightness in the girl all at once. And then when you saw Harry give him the tears, you did the second hardest thing, which is to stop being the cleverest person in the field and follow the person who has found the better road. You backed his play. You turned your cleverness to selling his truth. That is what the two of you are. Do you see it? He feels the road and you build it. Neither of you is enough alone against a man like that. Together you are something I do not think even Dumbledore has counted on. She gathered them up, one under each arm, wet and shaking and alive, and took them in out of the failing light. That night she did not go south. She sent word to Lucius that the northern house had flooded and she would be days setting it right, which was the kind of tedious domestic catastrophe he accepted without a second thought, and she stayed. She sat up in the old hall with Andromeda, who had come at the mirror's call and refused to leave, and the two sisters drank Cassiopeia's terrible slow gin and did the sums on how bad it was. He'll come back, Andromeda said. You know he will. He wrote it down. Moody doesn't write a thing down and forget it. He'll come back, Narcissa agreed. Not soon. He has nothing, a shimmer and a crying child, and if he moves on that with no house to show a tribunal, Dumbledore can't protect him and he knows it. But he'll come back in a year and two with a reason, and next time he'll bring the eye and a plan for the eye. She turned the glass in her fingers. I have until then to make the wall proof against a thing that sees through walls. I don't know how to do that. Cassiopeia's notes don't have it. There may not be a way. There's one way, Andromeda said quietly, and you already know it and you don't want to say it, so I'll say it. The children can't stay children hidden on a moor forever. In 2 years they're 11. In 2 years the letters come, you know they'll come. The quill at Hogwarts writes down every magical child born in Britain the day they're born, and it wrote down 2 blacks at this house 9 years ago, whether the ministry knows it or not. The letters come, and then you have a choice you've been not making since the night you carried them home. You can keep them hidden here until Moody or the ministry or the world finally cracks the wall, and it will crack, sissy, walls always crack, or you can do the thing that's actually safe, which is the thing that looks least safe of all. Send them out, Narcissa said. Into the one place in Britain crawling with the exact people I've spent 10 years hiding them from, Dumbledore's own castle. Snape, who'd know Lily's eyes across a great hall. Draco, who'd know his own cousins were invented. Send them into the middle of it in plain sight and dare the world not to see them. Hide them where hiding stops working and start hiding them in the open, Andromeda said. It's the oldest trick the family ever knew, and you know it better than any of us. You've spent 10 years being the most visible woman in England so that no one would ever think you had anything to hide. It worked on everyone, including your own husband, for 10 years. Do for them what you did for yourself. She refilled the terrible gin. A hidden black is a question, a black standing in the great hall in the right robes, board entitled exactly where everyone expects a black to be. That's an answer. Nobody hunts an answer. Narcissa did not reply for a long time. Across the hall on the wall, 2 gold names caught the low fire. Somewhere above, 2 children who had that afternoon faced down the most dangerous horror in Britain, and one were asleep. One of them with a page of 10-year-old newspaper still folded against his skin. 2 years, Narcissa said at last. I have 2 years to teach them enough black heritage, enough magic, enough craft, that when I finally do the maddest thing I have ever done and walk them through the doors of that castle in the open, they are so completely and convincingly what I have made them that the truth of what they were becomes literally unbelievable. She set down the glass. Then I had better start teaching in earnest, both of you, everything. The old magic, the names, how we stand and how we lie, and every dead face on that wall and what it did. If they are going to be blacks in front of Albus Dumbledore, they are going to be the best blacks the house has produced in 100 years, and no one, not Moody, not Snape, not the old man himself, is going to be able to afford to believe otherwise. Andromeda lifted her terrible gin. To the best blacks in 100 years, she said, and God help the school that gets them. Upstairs, Harry turned in his sleep and did not wake, and the scar under his fringe lay quiet, and beside his bed on the floor Hermione had made a nest of blankets rather than sleep down the passage alone after the day they'd had, and neither of them knew that in the hall below, 2 sisters who had each in her own way been thrown away by the same cold family were deciding over the worst gin in England. To throw the whole world off the scent by handing it the truth in a costume it would never think to look under. The training went hard through that winter and the spring after, and somewhere in it the 2 of them made a treaty of their own that no adult was invited to sign. It happened at the library window, which had become theirs. They were not supposed to be up. Hermione had a candle Harry had lit for her, because Hermione still could not make fire and had stopped being scandalized by it and started simply requisitioning him for it, and she had the Ward Theory book open on the sill and the folded newspaper page flattened beside it, and she had covered the margin of a scrap of parchment in her cramped, dense hand. "I've been reading everything," she said, not looking up. "Everything the library has that mentions the war. There isn't much and Mother's taken most of it, but there's enough. And I've worked something out and I'm going to say it once and then we never have to say it again if you don't want." She put the quill down. "The child in the story is you. Harry Potter is you. The scar's the same, the year's the same, the name's the same. You're the one the whole country's looking for. That's what the wall's for. That's what all of it's for." Harry looked out at the black moor. The candle steadied. "I know," he said. "I worked it out too. When your face did the thing with the page." He was quiet a moment. "I didn't want to say it either in case saying it made it more true." "It's exactly as true either way," Hermione said, which was the most comforting thing she knew how to say, and from her it was comfort. Then she did the un-Hermione thing, the thing that told him how far outside her books this had taken her. She reached over and put her hand flat on the newspaper page over the printed name that was his, covering it. "I don't care about him, the child in the story. Everyone in the world can want him. I've never met him." She turned her head and looked at Harry in the candlelight, fierce and certain, a girl who had researched her way to the edge of what could be known and then walked off the edge on purpose. "I care about you. The one who goes over walls after stupid lambs and cries on purpose to save us and lights my candles because I can't. If they ever come for the child in the story, they'll have to come through me first, and I've read 3 books on defensive warding and you have not, so I'll be the wall and you be the sea," exactly like she said, and neither of us tells them which ocean they're in. Harry put his hand over hers, over the covered name, so that the two of them were pressing the story of the boy who lived shut between their palms. "Deal," he said. Below them the fire had gone out and the sisters had gone to their beds and the house kept its watch on the door, and above the cold hearth in the empty hall 2 threads of gold held the last of nothing, waiting for morning. And at the window 2 children who were 9 and 10 and had a war coming for them that neither fully believed and sat with their hands stacked on an old newspaper, having promised each other the only thing either of them had to give, which was the whole of it. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. What the Owl Knows. The letters came to Andromeda's house in July, because Andromeda's house was the only address the Black Estate had ever given the school, and Andromeda carried them north herself rather than trust them to an owl that could not find the moor. There were 2, heavy cream parchment, the green ink already familiar to every wizarding child from 100 stories. Miss H.C. Black and Mr. H.A. Black, and beneath the names an address that made Andromeda's mouth go tight when she read it, because the quill that wrote it had written a thing the ministry did not know and the Fidelia should have hidden: the North Room, Corby House. The school's own book of admittance had recorded 2 children it should not have been able to see in a house that did not exist, and had done it 11 years ago on the nights they were born to the tapestry, and had been holding their places ever since. "It knows," Andromeda said, laying the letters on the kitchen table where Narcissa sat with her hands flat on the wood. "The castle knows they're there, sissy. It's known for 11 years. If Dumbledore ever thinks to read his own admittance book with the right question in his head, he won't. Why would he? He's looking for Harry Potter, not for 2 blacks the school has always expected." Narcissa turned one letter with a fingertip. "But you're right that the book sees what the ministry can't. That is exactly why we are going to do this now in the open, before the gap between what the school knows and what the world knows becomes a thing someone notices. 2 black children come of age and go to Hogwarts, the most ordinary sentence in England. We are going to make it the most ordinary sentence in England." She looked up. "It's time. They're 11. I promised them the truth at 11, and I promised myself I'd send them out before the wall cracked, and both promises come due in the same summer. Bring them in, Dromeda. I'll tell them today, all of it." She told them in the old hall under the tapestry, because the wall was the one witness that could not repeat what it heard. She had them sit. She did not sit. She stood in front of the 2 gold names she had made 11 years ago, and she looked at the 2 children who wore them now, 11 years old, long-limbed and watchful in hers, and she began at the place she had never begun before, which was the truth entire. "You worked most of it out 2 winters ago," she said. "I know you did. I found the newspaper under Harry's mattress, and I let you keep it, because a thing you fought to learn is a thing you'll hold better than a thing you're handed. But you have a child's half of it, and today you get the whole, because at Hogwarts you will meet people who have the other half, and you cannot afford to be surprised by your own story in front of Severus Snape." She drew a breath. "Harry, your name was Harry James Potter. Your father was James Potter, who was my cousin, whether the family liked to count it or not, and a braver and more foolish man than the family ever produced on purpose. Your mother was Lily. She was Muggle-born, and she was, by every account I have ever heard, including the ones that hated her, the finest witch of her year, and she loved your father past sense and loved you past that, and on the last night of the war she stood between you and the most dangerous wizard who has ever lived and would not move, and he killed her for it." Harry did not move. The candles along the wall held very still, because he was holding them still, which was its own kind of grief. A boy of 11 controlling his magic through the worst sentence he had ever heard, because he had been taught to and because the teaching had gone that deep. His name, Narcissa said, was Voldemort. You may say it in this house. A name is only a name, and I will not raise you to flinch at a word. He built himself out of an ordinary, clever, cruel boy into something that was barely a man anymore, and he decided, for reasons I will explain when you are older and can hold them without them poisoning you, that you in particular had to die. He came to your house at Godric's Hollow on the last night of October, 11 years ago. He killed your father in the hall. He killed your mother in your nursery. And then he turned his wand on you, a child of 15 months, and he spoke the curse that has no counter and no survivor, and it rebounded. No one living knows precisely why. Your mother's death is part of it. There is old magic in a mother who chooses to die in a child's place, older than wands, and he did not understand it because he had never in his life loved anything enough to understand it. The curse broke on you and took him instead. It left you that scar, and it left the country a hero it had never met, and it left him not dead, diminished, scattered, gone to ground somewhere far away, less than a ghost, but not dead. I have never once believed he was dead, and I raised you both against the day he proves me right. That's why the scar hurts, Harry said. His voice came out level, which cost him everything. When something dark is near, or when you all talk about him. I believe the curse left something of him in it. A door that never fully shut. Narcissa came and knelt in front of him so that she was looking up, which she did for no one else on earth. I have watched that scar for 11 years the way a sailor watches weather. It is the one part of you I could not ward, and it is why of everything I am most loath to send you back out into the world where he might one day be. But I am sending you anyway, and I will tell you why in a moment, and it is not a reason you will like, and it is the right one. Then she did the thing Harry had waited 11 years to have someone do without his asking. She told him about them, not the war, not the death, them. That James had been a magnificent idiot on a broomstick and had tormented Severus Snape at school in ways Narcissa did not defend, and had also thrown himself in front of curses meant for his friends without a half-second's calculation, and that Harry had his exact way of going still and dangerous when someone he loved was threatened. That Lily had a temper and a laugh you could hear across a courtyard and had once hexed 3 older boys for cornering a first year, and that Harry had her eyes, precisely her eyes, green in a way that had already, at 11, made 2 old people who knew her go quiet in the street. She gave him his parents as people, with faults and jokes and specific gestures, because a hero has no parents, only a story, and she had decided long ago that Harry would have parents even if she had to build them for him out of the memories of people who had loved and hated them. Was there no one, Harry asked when he could. It was the question under all the others, the one every child in a hidden house eventually asks. After, if everyone loved them so much, did no one come for me? Was I just left until you took me? Narcissa had known the question would come, and she had decided long before tonight to answer it with the truth, even though the truth had teeth. There was someone, she said. Your father named a godfather for you the day you were born, a man who would have died before he let you go to strangers, and nearly did. His name is Sirius Black. He is my cousin and Andromeda's, Regulus's elder brother, the one who ran from this family at 16, the name my aunt blasted off the wall for the crime of leaving. He loved your father like a brother, and he loved you on sight, and the night the war ended he went after the man he believed had betrayed your parents, and there was a street and a curse and 13 people dead, and Sirius was found laughing in the wreckage with his wand in his hand. She watched Harry take the shape of it. They sent him to Azkaban without a trial. Everyone believes he did it. Everyone believes he was the Potter's secret keeper, that he sold your mother and father to Voldemort and then killed the friend who accused him. It is the settled truth. The whole world knows it. But you don't say it like it's the truth, Hermione said, catching it, because Hermione caught everything. No, Narcissa said, because I knew Sirius. He was the one black in a generation who hated the dark more than he loved himself, who ran from this family at 16 because he would not carry the name's rot. A man like that does not spend 11 years dying by inches in a cell for a master he despised. It has never sat right with me, and I have spent quiet years and quiet galleons trying to learn what actually happened on that street, and I have not proven it yet. And until I do, he stays where he is, and you stay away from the subject entirely, because the last thing in the world we can afford is for Harry Potter's godfather to become interested in a boy named Black. She held Harry's eyes. But you asked if anyone came for you, and the answer is yes. A man is rotting in the sea for the crime of loving you too fast and being framed too well. You were never unwanted, Harry. You were only, for a while, unreachable. I reached you. And one day, if there is any justice I can buy or force or steal, I mean to reach him too. Harry cried at last, and it was not the performing kind, and Hermione moved without being asked and put herself against his side and held on, and Narcissa let it happen and did not tidy it away. And for a while the hall was only the sound of an 11-year-old weeping for parents he could not remember, in the arms of a girl who would not let go, under 2 gold names on a wall of the dead. When it had run its course, Narcissa turned to Hermione, because there was a second truth in the room and it belonged to the girl, and she had been holding it for 11 years. You've never asked me where you came from, Narcissa said. Not once. Harry asked from the time he could talk. You never did, and I always understood it because you were the one who did not dare hear the answer. She saw Hermione go still. You've spent 11 years bracing to be told you were the one who didn't really belong. The foundling, the one taken in out of charity, as my great-aunt took in strays. You built a whole self on being useful enough, clever enough, indispensable enough that we would never send you back. I watched you do it, and I could not tell you the truth until you were old enough to believe it over the old dread, and today you are. She reached into her robes and drew out a folded square of parchment, old, its ink browned, a fragment of a family record. The night I made you both blacks, the right did not balk at Harry, because Harry had Doria's blood and the house knew him. I expected it to balk at you. You were meant to be the adoption, the true stranger the magic would take in only because I demanded it, and instead the house knew you faster than it knew him, brighter, like something it had lost and given up on. Hermione's hands had gone white in her lap, one thumb pressed hard against the knuckle of the other, which was the only thing about her that ever gave her away. That's not possible. I'm Muggle-born. Everything I've ever read. You are the descendant, Narcissa said, of a squib, a daughter of this house, generations back, born without magic in an age when a black born without magic was worse than a black born dead. They did not burn her off the wall. They did something quieter and crueler. They married her out into the ordinary world and struck her from the record, and told themselves she had never existed, and let her magicless line drift down through the Muggle centuries, carrying a name the family had erased and a blood the family swore was spent. She unfolded the parchment and held it out, and on it, in a hand 200 years dead, was a single struck-through name, scorched at the edge, with a line of descent trailing off the bottom of the page into nothing. It was not spent, it slept. It surfaced in a gray town 11 years ago, and a 2-year-old who frosted every window in July, and the wheel of blood that showed me Harry showed me you in the same breath and called you kin because you are. You are not the adoption, Hermione. You never were. You are a black who was stolen from the family 200 years before you were born, and the night I made you Trueborn I was not giving you a family you had no claim to. I was giving back a thing that was taken. You came home. Hermione did not cry. Hermione, faced with the largest fact of her life, did what Hermione always did with the largest facts. She went utterly quiet and turned the parchment in her hands and read the struck-through name 3 times, and then she looked up, and the thing on her face was too big for the level voice she tried to put it in. So I'm real, she said. I'm not pretend. The tapestry isn't being kind to me. I'm on it because I'm supposed to be on it. You are on it, Narcissa said, because it would have been a lie to leave you off. Look. They looked, and Hermione's gold name, that had always burned a shade brighter than the rest, seemed brighter still now that she knew why, joined to the tree by a thread that ran up past a dozen dead into a scorched 200-year-old name that was, at last, in the mouth of someone alive, no longer erased. Harry, red-eyed, wrung out, looked from the wall to his cousin, and said the thing that only he would have thought to say. So we're actually related, you and me, really related, blood and everything, not just pretend cousins. He almost smiled, the first time since the story began. I always said you were family. Now you have to admit it. It's on the wall. You can't argue with the wall. We're something like 4th cousins 6 times removed, Hermione said, who had already done the arithmetic, because of course she had in the 90 seconds since she'd learned it, which is barely related at all, actually, statistically. It's on the wall, Harry said. It's on the wall, Hermione admitted, and let him have it, and something that had braced in her every night since a gray town let go all at once, and she leaned into him, and the two of them sat under their 2 joined names and were, for the length of one held quiet, exactly what the wall said they were. The reason Narcissa was sending them out when she finally gave it was the one Harry did not like, exactly as she'd promised. I can hide you here until the world finds you, she said, and the world will find you, because Alastor Moody wrote your house in his book and men like Moody come back, and because the school knows where you are even if the ministry doesn't, and because a wall that has held 11 years is a wall 11 years closer to the year it fails. Or I can do the harder thing, the thing that has kept me alive in a nest of the Dark Lord's servants for 20 years, and hide you where no one thinks to look, which is directly in front of them. 2 black children at Hogwarts, entitled, well-taught, unremarkable in the way that only the very old families are unremarkable. Nobody hunts a black who is exactly where a black is supposed to be. The hunt is for a hidden Potter. We give them a visible black, and we let the visible black stand so squarely in the light that the idea he is anything else becomes literally unthinkable. She looked at Harry. You will walk past the men hunting you every day. You will be taught by one who knew your mother's face. You will sleep under the same roof as Albus Dumbledore, who has looked for you for 11 years. And not one of them will see you, because I have spent 11 years making you into the one thing they are certain the hidden Potter is not. A real, dull, arrogant, thoroughly accounted for black. That is the plan. It is monstrous, and it is the safest thing I can do for you, and I hate it, and we are doing it. Tell me you understand why. Because a secret you hide gets hunted, Hermione said slowly, and a secret you show gets ignored. Because the best place to keep a thing, Harry said, is somewhere so obvious that looking there feels like a waste of time. He met her eyes. You taught us that with the candle. Hide the treasure at the bottom of the sea, but leave the surface so boring nobody wants to dive. I taught you that with the candle, Narcissa agreed, and now you are the candle, both of you. Everything you've learned, the holding, the blank face, the wand work, the occlumency, every dead black on this wall and what they did, it was never for a duel. It was for a dinner. For 11 years of dinners at a long table full of clever, dangerous people where you will be watched every day and must give them every day nothing but a black. Snape will try to read you. You will let him find gobstones and lambs and boredom. Draco will befriend or torment you and never once guess whose sons and daughters he's sitting beside. Dumbledore will be kind to you, and his kindness is the most dangerous thing in the castle, because kindness makes children want to be seen. You will let him be kind and you will stay unseen. Can you do it? Not can you want to. Can you do it every day for years? Yes, said Harry, who had cried at a beck to save them both. Yes, said Hermione, who had nearly lost them by being too clever and had learned the lesson in her bones. And if we can't, if one day one of us slips, then the other covers and you get to a fire and you call this house and I will be there before the ash is cold, exactly as I have been your whole lives. Narcissa gathered them in, one under each arm, the accounting done, the truth told, the plan set. You have never once been unguarded. You are not unguarded now. You are only at last going to be brave somewhere I can't stand in the room. That is all growing up is. I've dreaded it and I would not stop it for the world. The month before September, she drilled them, because a plan is a story you tell yourself and a cover is a story a stranger must be able to break and cannot. She built the story first, and she built it out of true things, because a lie made of true things has no seams. They were the children of a black cousin who had married abroad and died there, a branch of the family too distant and too dull for anyone at Malfoy Manor to have tracked. They had been raised in the north by their great-aunt's old household after their parents' death, tutored privately, and were only now, at 11, being sent into the world. Every piece of it could be checked, and every piece would hold, because Cassiopeia had died a recluse in a house no one could find, and a recluse's affairs are a mist no auditor wants to walk into. Then she taught them the story the way a duelist teaches a stance, until it lived below thought. She would come at them across the kitchen table without warning. Where were you born? Who taught you your letters? Why have I never seen you at a single Yule? What was your mother's maiden name? Say it faster, don't look up when you answer. A real child is bored by their own history. And she made them answer 100 times, 1,000, until the answers came out flat and unrehearsed and true-sounding, until Hermione stopped over-explaining and Harry stopped going 1 degree too blank. Until neither of them had a tell she could find, and she looked very hard, because Snape would look harder. Last, she taught them the scar. She would not trust it to a single charm that a curse-breaker's eye might strip. She keyed a glamour to the old black signet and taught Harry to renew it himself each morning, wandless, as he lit a candle, so that even if he lost every other protection, the concealment lived in his own magic and could not be taken from him without taking him. Under it his forehead was smooth, unmarked, an ordinary boy's. She made him do it and undo it until he could do it half asleep, because half asleep, stumbling to a great hall breakfast, was exactly when he would need it and exactly when he would forget. The scar is the one thing that can end all of this in a single morning, she told him, holding his chin, checking the seam of the glamour with a curse-breaker's care. Snape knew your mother. Dumbledore has seen that mark on 100 sketches. The moment either of them sees the lightning on your head, every wall I have built comes down, and it comes down on all of us, on Andromeda, on Nettle, on you. So you will treat this charm the way a diver treats his air. You check it before you surface, every day, even the days you are certain, especially those, tell me you will. Every day, Harry said, even the certain ones. Especially those, said Hermione, who had appointed herself, without discussion, the keeper of the days he might forget. Diagon Alley in August was a river of noise, and Narcissa did not walk them into it, because Narcissa could not be seen buying school things for 2 children the world had never heard of. Andromeda took them. Narcissa watched from a coffee house across the way under a glamour that made her forgettable, present but not present, a woman with a newspaper who happened to be there for hours, because she would not let them into that river without an eye on the far bank. Gringotts came first, because a black does not walk into Diagon Alley without money any more than a black walks in without a name. The vault Andromeda took them to was not a Malfoy vault. It was one of the old black holdings, keyed years ago by Narcissa to a signet Andromeda now wore for the day, and the goblin who read the key looked at Andromeda's face and then, for a long unhurried moment, at the 2 children behind her, and said nothing, because goblins are the one people in Britain who understand exactly how much a family will pay for silence and exactly how little they owe the ministry. The cart plunged. The vault, when it ground open, was not gold heaped like a story. It was older than that, and stranger, shelves of it, ledgers and deeds, and a suit of goblin-made mail gone black with age, and coin, yes, but coin as an afterthought to the weight of a family that had been rich for 600 years. Harry stood in the cold vault light and understood in his body rather than his head that he was standing inside the thing Narcissa had made him part of, that the name he wore was not a costume borrowed for a term, but a room he could walk into that had his own blood on the lease. "Take what you need for school and not a nut more," Andromeda said. "Blacks are never seen to count and never seen to want. You'll learn the difference by Christmas." She dropped a handful of galleons into each of their bags without appearing to look at them, which was itself a lesson, and shut the vault. Flourish and blots nearly undid the whole performance, because flourish and blots undid Hermione. She had grown up in a cold library that Narcissa had spent 11 years weeding. She had never in her life stood inside a room where books were new and plentiful and for sale, and she went very still in the doorway in the particular way that meant her whole system had briefly stopped serving anything but want. Andromeda gave her 10 minutes and a limit, and lost the argument about the limit inside 4 of them. But it was at the back of the shop, by a display stacked shoulder-high, that the day turned dangerous, because the display was a tower of a new biography with a golden lightning bolt embossed on the cover and a title in letters a foot tall, "The Boy Who Lived, The Search for the Vanished Hero." Harry stopped in front of it. There was a whole book about him, about the mystery of him, about where the lost savior of the wizarding world might be, and it was selling briskly to families who would never guess that the vanished hero was standing in front of the display in good black robes, reading the price. He did not touch it. He looked at it for exactly as long as a bored aristocratic child would look at a popular book beneath his notice, which Hermione had drilled into him, and then he said, loud enough for the nearest browsing wizard to hear, "They'll print anything," in a voice of flawless contempt, and turned away, and the browsing wizard chuckled and agreed that it was all rot. And the most wanted child in Britain bought his schoolbooks 9 feet from a tower of his own legend, and walked out with an eye on the far bank watching him do it. The wands did not come from Ollivander. Narcissa had been explicit about that weeks before in the hall. Garrick Ollivander remembers every wand he has ever sold and every hand that ever held one, and he sold the wand that made that scar, and he will look at you, Harry, and his face will do a sum in front of the whole shop. We do not go to Ollivander, the house keeps its own. She had taken them instead to a case in the Corby House library that Nettle had guarded for 90 years and that neither child had ever seen opened. Behind the glass lay the wands of dead blacks, 24 of them on a bed of black velvet gone bald with age, each with a name in faded ink beneath it. Some of the names were scorched, some Harry knew from the tapestry. All of them had outlived the hands that carried them, and lying there in a row they had the particular stillness of things that are only sleeping. "A wand outlives its wizard," Narcissa said, opening the case with the signet, "and a good wand, a family wand, does not die with the hand, it waits. It is not the same as being chosen by a stranger's stock. Ollivander matches a child to a new thing. This is older. This is the house offering you a wand that already knows your blood, and if the blood is true, the wand will wake to it. If it is not, nothing will happen, and I will have to think again." She stepped back. "Walk the case, don't reach, let it reach." Harry walked the case, and 3 wands down from the end a slim dark length of hawthorn behind the glass grew warm to the room before he was near it, and when he lifted it out, hawthorn and dragon heartstring, the label said, "A black dead 100 years." It did not spark so much as ignite, a spray of white light that leapt to every other wand in the case and set them all glowing faintly in answer, kin recognizing kin. And the cold library filled for a moment with the low sound the tapestry made on the night he was named, the house knowing its own. Hermione found hers at the far end, vinewood and phoenix feather, and it did the strangest thing of the night. It turned in its velvet before she touched it, the tip swinging a slow half-inch toward her outstretched hand like a compass finding north, and when she took it up the light it threw was not white but a deep gold, the exact gold of the 2 names on the wall, and Narcissa, watching, put her hand briefly to her own mouth, because in 90 years the case had never done that for anyone, and it had just done it for the foundling the family swore was spent. Heritage wands, blood-keyed, unregistered, untraceable, and neither would ever appear in the ministry's book of purchases because you cannot buy what your family already owns. Hermione had turned the vinewood over in her hands afterward in the cold library for a long time. "It went gold," she said at last, not quite a question. "Not white like Harry's, gold, the color of the names on the wall." She looked up at Narcissa. "It knew what you told me last week, that I'm not the adoption. That I came home. A wand doesn't read a family record. It read my blood, and my blood answered in the family's own color, and it did that before I knew to want it to." She held the wand against her chest as she had held a chewed board book 11 years ago in a car park under a sodium light. "I spent my whole life being the one who had to earn her place, and a stick of vinewood just told me in front of everyone that I never had to earn it at all. I'm not sure I know how to be a person who never had to earn it." Narcissa had said nothing to that, only put a hand briefly on the back of the girl's head, because some truths a child has to walk into alone, at her own pace, and Hermione had a whole life now in which to learn to believe the one the wand had handed her. But there was still Madame Malkin's, and robes had to be fitted, and it was at Madame Malkin's that the two worlds Narcissa had kept apart for 11 years came within 6 feet of touching. Harry was on the fitting stool when the shop door chimed and a pale boy came in with a familiar drawl already going, complaining about the wait, and Harry knew him before he turned, because Harry had been shown likenesses quietly for years. "This is your cousin Draco, this is the son of the house I share. You will meet him one day and you must not know him." And here he was, 11 and imperious and utterly certain of the width of the world, Draco Malfoy, who did not know that the dark-haired boy on the next stool was the secret his mother had carried since before he could walk. "Hogwarts too," Draco said to Harry, "the way one predator checks the pedigree of another." His eyes went over Harry's robes, good robes, old family robes that Narcissa had chosen precisely so that this moment would go the way it was going. "You've got the look of a proper family at least. Half the people in here today, honestly. What's your name?" "Black," Harry said, just that. He gave Draco the blank, the good blank, the bored aristocratic nothing, and he watched the name land. Draco's certainty flickered. "Black, there aren't any blacks. I'd know. My mother's a black, my mother's the last of them. There's only her and her mad sister in Azkaban and the blood traitor she doesn't talk about." Something worked behind the pale eyes, a boy encountering a fact that did not fit the map he had been handed at birth. "Which black?" "The kind your mother doesn't talk about, evidently," Harry said, in a voice of purest boredom, and Hermione, 3 stools down, made a sound into her sleeve that she turned into a cough, and Draco flushed, because he had been made small in a robe shop by a stranger with a better blank than his own, and he opened his mouth to make it a fight. And Andromeda was there smoothly, a guardian collecting her charges. "Sorry, we're wanted, arms up now," and she had them off the stools and out the door and into the crowd before Draco's retort had finished forming, and across the street, a woman with a newspaper folded at once, a signal, and the moment closed. Draco Malfoy went home that night and told his father at dinner that there had been a rude boy at Madame Malkin's who claimed to be a black, and Lucius, who knew to the galleon the extent of his wife's family and counted no living blacks but her and the 2 in Azkaban, frowned, and said it was impossible, some jumped-up nobody trading on a dead name, and thought no more of it. And Narcissa, across the table, buttered her bread and agreed that people would say anything these days, and did not let her hand shake, because she had spent 30 years teaching it not to, and this was the night she had been training it for. On the last night before the 1st of September, Narcissa did not go south. She stayed at Corby House, and Nettle made the meal she made on the nights that mattered, and Andromeda came, and Nymphadora came, grown now, an Auror in training with a metamorph's ridiculous hair, and a way of making Harry laugh that no danger had ever managed to train out of him. They ate at the scrubbed kitchen table with the sleeves pushed up, all of them, the whole assembled improbable family that a woman had built one theft at a time out of the ruin of a cold house, and for one evening no one spoke of Snape or Dumbledore or the door that never fully shut behind a scar. Nettle would not sit. She never sat at the table, no matter how many years Narcissa had told her the old rules did not run in this house. She stood at the head of it by Narcissa's chair and served, and tonight she served as though feeding the 2 of them one last time might be enough to keep them safe 200 miles away, which was the only theology an elf had. At the end of the meal she went out and came back with 2 parcels wrapped in the same scrap tapestry cloth she wore, and she put one in front of each child and stood very straight while they opened them. They were socks, thick, gray, hand-knitted, with a black corby worked into the ankle of each one where a shoe would hide it. "So the castle floors do not have your feet," Nettle said, her voice fierce and cracked, "and so that when you are far away and cold and cannot say our name out loud, you will put your feet into something that came off these hands, and you will remember that this house is at the other end of every cold morning, waiting." She drew herself up. "And if either of you is ever in true danger, real danger, the kind where the coat comes off, you take one sock in your fist and you say Nettle once into it, and Nettle will come, wards or no wards, ministry or no ministry, and Nettle will bring the whole of this family down on whatever is threatening you like the roof of the world. An elf can go where a witch cannot. Mistress made the wall. Nettle is the door in it. Do not forget you have a door." Harry got down off his chair and hugged the old elf, which no one had told him he was allowed to do, and which Nettle had plainly not been prepared for in 90 years of service, and she stood rigid in his arms with her enormous eyes streaming and her hands not knowing where to land, and then landed them at last on the back of the child's head and patted it twice and told him he was creasing her cloth and did not let go. Later, when the others slept, Narcissa found the 2 of them at the library window that had been there since they were 9, not talking, just sitting, the way people sit the night before the shape of their lives changes. Hermione had her trunk packed and repacked twice. Harry had the folded newspaper page, the one that had started it, and he was turning it in his hands. "I keep thinking," he said when Narcissa sat down with them, "that tomorrow I have to stop being me, be a black, be boring. Never let anyone see the real thing." He looked at the page, "and I don't know if I can do it for years. I can do it for an afternoon." Moody was an afternoon, but years. Narcissa took the page out of his hands gently and folded it once more and tucked it into the breast of his new robes over his heart, where the scar could not see it, but he would always know it was there. "You are not going to stop being you," she said. "You are going to carry you where they can't see, exactly here, the way you've carried this page. Being a black in front of them is not becoming someone else. It is a coat you put on over the true thing to keep the true thing dry. Every night you'll take it off in your own bed, and there you'll be, the same Harry who went over the wall for a lamb, unchanged, only wearing a coat all day. And you will not be alone in the coat." She put her hand on Hermione's and Hermione's on Harry's and stacked them, 3 deep, on the folded page over his heart, exactly as the 2 children had stacked theirs on it 2 winters before. "She is in there with you. She always has been. You be the sea and she'll be the wall, and neither of you tells them which ocean they're in. And in 330 days you'll come home for the summer and take the coat off and be insufferable on this moor for 2 whole months, and I will complain about it every single day, and mean none of it." Harry looked at the 3 stacked hands over his heart, and then out at the dark moor that had been the whole of his world and would not be after tomorrow, and he did the thing he had not been able to do since the story began, which was to smile properly all the way, the openness she had never trained out of him, and thanked every star she had failed to. 330 days, he said. "I've already counted them," said Hermione, who had, and the 3 of them sat at the window a while longer over the folded page in the stacked hands, while below the house kept its watch on the door, and above the cold hearth 2 gold names held the dark. And somewhere far south a man who thought he knew the whole of his wife's family slept beside the largest secret in England and did not dream of it, and tomorrow in the open, in plain sight. The safest and most dangerous thing Narcissa had ever done would get on a scarlet train and go. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The Hat's Dilemma. Narcissa stood on platform 9 3/4 as Draco's mother, and 50 feet away her 2 hidden children boarded the Hogwarts Express, and she did not look at them, and it was the hardest thing she had done since the war. The platform was the whole performance in miniature, and she played it flawlessly because flawless was the only safe thing to be. She was Lucius Malfoy's wife, straightening her son's collar, telling Draco to write, telling him that Professor Snape would look after him, and that he was to make the right friends and not the loud ones. Draco endured the collar and preened at the promise of Snape and looked past her already at the older students, at the shape of the self he meant to become. And past Draco at the far end of the platform, Andromeda under a glamour was handing 2 trunks up into a carriage, and a dark-haired boy was turning to say something to a brown-haired girl, and the girl was laughing, and Narcissa let her eyes go over them the way a stranger's eyes go over anyone, weightless, uninterested, and then away, and the not looking cost her more than any curse she had ever taken. "You're not listening," Lucius observed beside her. "I'm memorizing him," Narcissa said, which was true, and let him think she meant Draco, which was half of it. She was memorizing all 3, because in a moment the train would take 2 of them where she could not follow and leave her the one she was allowed to hold, and a mother learns to memorize fast on a platform like this. The whistle went. Draco climbed up without looking back, because 11-year-old boys do not look back and would rather die than be seen to want to. Down the platform the dark-haired boy did look back, once a flick, undisciplined, Harry all over, and found the elegant Malfoy woman on the platform for the length of a heartbeat, and neither of them moved a muscle that anyone could have read, and everything passed between them anyway, in the one currency the family had never been able to tax. Then the train pulled out scarlet and roaring and took the 2 most dangerous secrets in Britain north, and Narcissa Malfoy stood on the emptying platform beside her husband and did not weep, because her mother had beaten the habit out of her before she could walk, and turned at last to go home to the half of her life she was permitted. "He'll be Slytherin," Lucius said of Draco with satisfaction as they went. "The whole line has been back to the founding." Yes, Narcissa agreed, and thought of 2 other blacks on that train who would have to be Slytherin now too, into the very house her husband was so certain of, under the very nose of the very people, and wondered, not for the first time, whether she had built a fortress or a trap, and knew she would not learn which for years. On the train, Harry watched the platform slide away with his cousin's mother on it and put his forehead briefly against the cold glass, and Hermione let him have the moment and then pulled him back into the compartment by the sleeve, because moments were a thing they could not afford in public, and she had appointed herself the keeper of that too. "Coat on," she said quietly. It had become their word for it. Coat on, be the black, hide the true thing, check the seams. He checked the glamour on his scar with a flick of will, found it smooth, and nodded. Coat on. They had the compartment to themselves for an hour, which Hermione used to reread the first 3 chapters of every set text, and then the door slid open and a round-faced boy asked, miserably, whether they'd seen a toad, and they said they hadn't, and he went away. And a little later a red-haired boy passed in the corridor looking for a seat and glanced in at the 2 well-dressed children with the old family trunks and the closed faces, and decided visibly that this was not a compartment for him. And moved on. Harry watched him go with something he could not name and did not examine. There was a whole train of children out there making the friends they would keep for life, loud and easy, and he was in here being a black, and the being a black meant the door stayed mostly shut, and he had known that was the price and had agreed to it and had not understood, until the red-haired boy moved on, what it would actually feel like to pay it. Around midday a plump woman came down the corridor with a trolley, and Harry, who had grown up on nettles porridge and dark honey and had never in his life bought a sweet from a stranger, felt the whole ordinary world of it rise up in him at once. The tumbled cauldron cakes, the chocolate frogs, the licorice wands, all of it for sale to anyone with a coin, no wards, no watching, no name to protect. He bought a great deal of it. He bought more than 2 children could eat, because for the length of one transaction he got to be a boy on a train spending too much money on rubbish. And the trolley witch smiled at him and called him love and did not look once at his forehead, and he carried the armload back into the compartment and dumped it between them and said, "We're eating all of this before Scotland," in a voice that had briefly forgotten to be a black's. Hermione looked at the mountain of sugar, and at his face and understood exactly what the sweets were, because Hermione understood everything and she did not say a word about it. She picked up a chocolate frog, read the card, informed him that Circe had been a real and underrated witch, and that the biographical summary on the card was a disgrace to scholarship, and ate the frog in 2 bites, and let him have his 1 hour of being ordinary before Scotland took it back. It was, he thought later, the kindest thing anyone did for him that whole first day, and she never once let on she'd done it. "You felt that," Hermione said, when the wrappers were cleared and the light was going, not looking up from her book. "Felt what? The wanting to be out there, to just be a boy on a train." She turned a page. "I feel it too. I'd have talked to that girl 3 compartments down for 6 hours about the properties of Moonstone and had a friend for life. We don't get that. Not the easy way." She did look up now. "But we get this. We get the one thing nobody out there has, which is somebody who knows the whole of us. They'll all spend 7 years being half known by everyone. We're fully known by one. I've decided that's the better deal and I'm not revisiting it, so don't." Harry looked at her, at the fierce certainty she used to hold them both together, and did the arithmetic she'd already done and came out where she'd come out. "Better deal," he agreed. "Coat on." "Coat on," she said, and went back to Moonstone, and the train ran north into the dark, carrying them toward a castle full of people paid, in one way or another, to find exactly what the 2 of them were. The Sorting Hat knew Harry the moment it touched his hair, and for one endless second Narcissa's entire 11 years hung on the discretion of a 900-year-old hat. He had walked up when Professor McGonagall called Black Harry, the name ringing out into a hall that did not react, because the hall had never been told to react to it, which was the whole miracle of the plan, and he had sat and the brim had come down over his eyes and a voice had spoken in the private dark inside his own skull. "Well," the hat said, "now here's a thing I did not expect to see again. I sorted a Potter once, James, Gryffindor, and no argument from him or me. And here's his son wearing a black's face and a black's raising and a scar under a very good charm that I can see straight through, because I am not eyes, boy, I am older than eyes. Harry Potter alive at my table, the whole world grieving you, and here you sit." Harry did not panic. He had been drilled for exactly this 1,000 times across a scrubbed kitchen table, by someone who loved him too well to leave him unready. He did not build a wall because he had no walls. He flooded, he opened the whole surface of himself and let it babble. Moonstone and the red-haired boy and the cold glass and Hermione 3 seats back and the socks in his trunk with the Corby at the ankle, and under the flood he sank the one thing that mattered, the location, the name, the family, down into the deep dark where a reader would drown reaching for it. "Oh, that's clever," the hat said, sounding delighted. "That's not a boy's occlumency, that's someone very good teaching a boy who trusts them completely. Narcissa Black, of course, she always was the one of them with a spine and no appetite for what the spine was for. She hid you. She hid you as one of her own and did it so well the school's own book thinks you were born to it. Are you going to tell them?" Harry thought as steadily as he could. "Because if you are, I'd rather know now. Tell them." The hat made a sound that in a person would have been a laugh. "Boy, I have sat on the head of every schemer and saint in this country for 900 years, and I have never once repeated what I read. I am the one confidant in Britain who cannot be made to talk by love or torture or the headmaster himself. Your secret is safer under me than it has ever been anywhere. The only question in front of us is where you go, and that, I confess, is a genuine puzzle, because you are 2 boys stitched into one. There's your father in you, loud and brave and gold, Gryffindor to the bone. And there's what she made, patient and hidden and long-sighted, which is not Gryffindor at all. Which do I answer?" Harry thought about it, honestly, the way Narcissa had taught him to think about the hardest things. "The one that keeps me hidden," he thought, "the one that keeps them all safe. Whatever house does that. I stopped getting to choose the brave, wrote out loud the night she carried me off a battlefield, put me where the coat fits." The hat was quiet a moment, and when it spoke again there was something almost gentle in it. "You know," it said, "that's the bravest thing anyone said under me in a decade, and it's an argument for Gryffindor if ever I heard one, choosing the hidden road because it protects the people you love. But you're right about the coat, and she's right, and a Potter who has learned to be patient is a more dangerous thing to the dark than a Potter who charges, which is what got your parents killed, if you'll forgive an old hat." Go where she made you, go and be the sea, Slytherin. The hat roared to the hall, and the Slytherin table applauded a new black joining its ancient number, and no one in the great hall, not the headmaster at the high table, not the sallow man beside him whose black eyes had snapped to Harry's face and narrowed, not the pale boy already sliding down the bench to make a place for a cousin he did not know he had. No one knew that the Sorting Hat had just spent a private minute conspiring with the boy who lived to keep the whole world in the dark. Hermione went up when McGonagall called Black Hermione, and the Hat had a shorter argument with her, because Hermione's mind was less a weather system than a fortress with the treasure very deep, and it took the Hat only a moment to find her too. You're the foundling she made Trueborn, and the house was right to want you back. There's more Ravenclaw in you than in half my Ravenclaws, and only a moment more to find the thing under the brilliance that decided it. You'd thrive in Ravenclaw, the Hat told her. Have books and quiet and rivals worth beating. But you'd be there and he'd be in Slytherin, and you've built your whole self around being the wall in front of that boy, and I'm not fool enough to put a wall in a different building from the thing it guards. And besides, it added, you'll do more good in Slytherin than any sorting in a century. That house needs one brilliant Muggle-born that wasn't to grow up in the middle of it, being undeniably the best and never once being what they'd expect. Slytherin. And so both new blacks went to the green table together into the deepest of the deep end, and up at the high table Severus Snape watched the dark-haired one take his seat, and could not for the life of him say why the set of those shoulders, or the exact green of the eyes that had flicked once across the hall, had reached into a part of himself he kept locked and turned a key he had thrown away 11 years ago. Slytherin House, it turned out, was the easiest place in the castle to hide and the hardest place to breathe. It was easy because everyone in it was performing something. A house of children raised to advantage was a house where a closed face was manners, not mystery, where no one asked a real question because a real question was a weakness handed to a rival, where Harry's blank and Hermione's wall were simply the local dialect, and two blacks who kept their own counsel were exactly boringly correct. Narcissa had chosen the house that would camouflage them, and she had chosen right. In Gryffindor, Harry's shut door would have been a scandal that drew every warm, curious hand to pry it open. In Slytherin, it was a Tuesday. It was hard because Draco Malfoy would not let the matter of the blacks alone. He had recognized Harry from the robe shop within an hour of the feast, and he had spent the first week alternately courting and testing them, because Draco's instincts were good even when his information was catastrophically wrong. He wanted them to be real because real blacks of the right sort were exactly the allies his father had told him to make, and he could not make the sums add up because his mother was the last of the blacks. Everyone knew it, and here were two of them, and when he wrote home to demand an explanation, he received one that satisfied him not at all. He cornered them in the common room the second night, under the green lake light that turned everyone the color of drowned things, with Crabbe and Goyle arranged behind him like furniture. So, he said, dropping into the chair opposite without being asked, which in Slytherin was a declaration. Blacks, my mother says you're the provincial branch, the ones who married down. He watched for the flinch. No offense, somebody has to be the poor relations. None taken, Harry said, not looking up from the essay he was pretending to write. Somebody has to be the loud ones, too. Goyle worked that out a second before Crabbe did, and neither of them was sure whether it had been an insult, and Draco, who was quicker, went pink at the neck and then decided visibly to find it funny, because a Malfoy who was seen to be bested by a poor relation was worse off than one who laughed along. You're all right, Black, he said, as though bestowing something. Sharper than you look. My father says the old families have to stick together these days, with the way the school's going, half-bloods, mudbloods, the headmaster letting anyone in. He said the ugly word lightly, testing, watching Hermione, because Draco's instincts told him the girl was the one to watch even when he could not say why. Hermione turned a page of her book. She said, which was the most withering thing in her arsenal precisely because it granted him nothing, not agreement, not offense, not even attention, and Draco, who had wanted a reaction as badly as he wanted air, got a syllable and a page turn and no way to tell whether he had won or lost, and eventually got up and took his furniture away to bother someone who would give him more. When he was gone, Hermione's foot found Harry's under the table, still here, still holding. And Harry breathed out slow, and did not let his face do any of the things it wanted to do about a boy who used that word, and did not know he was using it in front of the very person the word was invented to wound. Narcissa read her son's letter 3 times at the breakfast table at Malfoy Manor, and answered it that night, and it was one of the strangest documents she ever composed. A mother explaining to her son, with perfect truth and total misdirection, the existence of her own hidden children. There was, she wrote, a distant branch of the family, a cousin of her father's who had married abroad and been quietly dropped from the reckoning, as the family dropped anyone who married beneath the mark. The children were that cousin's orphans, raised in the north, and they were blacks, technically, in the way that a name persists in a ledger after everyone has forgotten the face, and Draco was to be civil to them, because a black was a black, and one did not air the family's small economies of blood in front of the school, but he need not exert himself because they were a poor and provincial branch of no particular use. It was a masterpiece. It made her secret children simultaneously legitimate enough to explain and dull enough to ignore, and it came from their own mother's hand, and Draco believed every word of it and lost interest by October, exactly as she had engineered, and never once suspected that the woman writing him bored dismissals of the provincial cousins was the same woman who had carried one of them off a battlefield and taught the other to make gold light leap from a dead man's wand. That was the cost of the plan that no one had fully counted, not the danger but the daily obscenity of lying to the child she was allowed to keep in order to protect the two she was not. Snape was the sharper problem, and Snape did not write letters. He watched. Harry felt it from the first potions lesson, the black eyes going over him and returning, over and returning, a man reading a text he was certain he had read before in another edition. Snape said nothing that first month that a hostile professor would not say to any pupil. He set them to the brewing, and he prowled the rows, and he stopped twice at Harry's cauldron, and looked not at the cauldron but at Harry's face, at the eyes. And Harry gave him the flood, bored, dutiful, and aristocratic boy tolerating a subject beneath him, and let the true thing sink, and Snape, who had spent a decade learning to walk into other men's minds, walked into Harry's and found a shallow tide of nothing and came out with sand in his teeth and no memory in his hands. Only the maddening certainty that he had known this shape of a person once and could not name it. Black, Snape said on the second occasion very quietly so that only Harry and Hermione at the next bench could hear. Have we met? I don't believe so, sir, Harry said in the voice Narcissa had drilled 1,000 times across the kitchen table. We don't come south much, my family keeps to itself, so I am told. Snape's eyes did not leave him. You have a familiar look about you. It is not a comfortable one, and he moved on down the row, robe snapping, and Hermione, without turning her head, moved her foot the half-inch that pressed against Harry's under the bench, which was their signal, developed in a fortnight, for still here, still holding, don't slip, and Harry did not slip, and the lesson ended and the seam held. But he wrote to Narcissa that night, in the cipher Andromeda had taught them, and told her that Snape had said he had a familiar look, and Narcissa read it at Malfoy Manor and sat very still, because she had known Severus at school, and she knew exactly whose eyes were making him uncomfortable, and she knew that a man like that would keep pulling the thread until it either broke or held, and she began, that night, to plan for the day it might break. Dumbledore was the danger Narcissa had warned them of most, and he was dangerous in exactly the manner she had promised, which was that he was kind. He found them in a gallery on a grey Sunday, the two of them alone, coming back from the owlery, and he did not summon them or loom. He was simply there at a window, looking out at the lake as though he had all the time in the world and had chosen to spend a little of it here, and he turned as they came and smiled at them over his half-moon spectacles with a warmth that had nothing performed in it at all, which was what made it lethal. Two of the new blacks, he said, I have been hoping to meet you properly. We so rarely have children of your family with us these days. The House of Black and Hogwarts have had a cool few decades. His eyes, very blue, went from one to the other, unhurried, benign, and Harry felt them land on him and rest, and felt the pull of them, the sheer gravity of being looked at by someone who seemed to find you the most interesting thing in the room. Harry, is it, and Hermione, settling into Professor Snape's house, I hope. Slytherin can seem cold to those who don't yet know it. It is not underneath, few things are. It suits us, sir, Harry said. He gave the old man the coat, the whole coat, bored and polite, and it was the hardest coat he had ever worn because everything young and open in him wanted to answer that warmth, wanted to be known by the kind old wizard at the window, and Narcissa's voice was in the back of his skull saying, kindness makes children want to be seen. You will let him be kind and you will stay unseen. So he stayed unseen. He looked at the great Albus Dumbledore and gave him a provincial boy's shallow courtesy and nothing underneath, and under the glamour his scar lay quiet because Dumbledore was not the dark. Dumbledore was only the single most perceptive man in Britain being gentle at him, which was worse. You have a look of someone, Dumbledore said to Harry mildly, still smiling. I can't quite place it. An old friend, perhaps. The older I get, the more everyone begins to resemble someone I have lost. It is one of the few genuine consolations of age. He let that sit, watching, and Harry understood that it was a door held courteously open, an invitation to step through, to be curious about who he resembled, to want to know, and that a real provincial black would find an old man's nostalgia tedious and let the door swing shut. My grandfather always said we all look like blacks in the end, sir, Harry said, in a voice of flawless disinterest. It's the one thing the family's good at. Dumbledore laughed, a real laugh, and the door swung shut, and if he was disappointed, nothing of it reached his face. Quite so, quite so. Well, my door is always open to my students, both of you. I keep sherbet lemons, which are a Muggle sweet, and I maintain one of their finest achievements. Do come and be bored by an old man's stories some evening. And he inclined his head and let them go, and they went at a bored, unhurried black pace, and did not run and did not look back, and only when they were 3 corridors away did Hermione let out a breath she had been holding since the window. He wasn't reading you, she murmured. I watched. He never tried the mind at all. He didn't need to. He just opened a door and waited to see if you'd walk through it. That's worse than Snape. Snape wants to catch you. Dumbledore wants you to hand yourself over and thank him for taking it. I nearly did, Harry admitted low, and it was the truest thing he'd said all week. For a second, I wanted him to know. I wanted the old man at the window to know who I was, to look at me and understand that the child everyone's grieving is right here alive and did all right. He pressed the heel of his hand briefly to his brow, checking the seam by reflex now. She was right. His kindness is the worst thing in the castle. Then we stay away from the sherbet lemons, Hermione said, for 7 years, and took his sleeve, and they went in to lunch, 2 provincial blacks of no particular interest, having just declined the most dangerous invitation in Britain. The scar first spoke in the great hall at the Hallowe'en feast, and it spoke of a man in a turban. Harry had felt it prick a few times before, a needle across the forehead when Defense Against the Dark Arts came round on the timetable. A flare he'd put down to nerves, but he had not connected it to anything until the feast, when the whole school sat under 1,000 floating candles and a ceiling of enchanted bats, and Professor Quirrell, the nervous, stammering man who taught defense, turned to say something to the professor beside him. And the back of his turbaned head came round toward the Slytherin table, and Harry's scar lit like a struck match under the glamour, a bolt of pain so pure and cold it stopped his fork halfway to his mouth. He did not cry out. He had been taught by an Auror's near discovery and 100 kitchen table drills. He set the fork down, unhurried, and pressed the heel of his hand casually to his brow, easing a feast headache that anyone could see he had, and under the hand he rechecked the glamour with a stab of will and found it holding, and he counted slow as Narcissa had taught him, writing out a thing he could not stop, and the pain, when Quirrell turned away again, receded to its needle and then to nothing. Hermione had seen. Hermione saw everything. Which one? She breathed, cutting her food, not looking at him. The turban, Quirrell, when the back of his head turned toward me. Harry made himself eat. Cold, coldest it's ever been. Like the doors, like there's something behind the door right there close and it knows me. Hermione ate for a moment in silence, and behind her eyes the whole machinery turned over, the girl who had read 3 books on everything applying herself to the worst text she had ever been handed. The scar's a door, she said very low. You said, she said, a door that never fully shut, and it only ever hurts near dark things. So either the defense professor is the darkest thing in this castle, which, look at him, he flinches at his own soup, or there's something near him, on him, behind him. She set down her knife. Write to her tonight. Tell her the scar answered a man, not a class. Tell her it was the back of his head. She turned at last and looked at Harry, and there was nothing shaken in it, only the fierce arithmetic of a girl guarding the one thing she'd built herself to guard. And you don't go near him, not ever, not for anything, not if he's teaching, not if he's drowning. You feel the cold, you go the other way, and I go with you. Say it. I go the other way, Harry said. You go with me. Coat on, she said. Coat on, he answered, and under 1,000 candles, at a table of children who would have handed him to the dark for a favor, the 2 of them finished the Hallowe'en feast like the bored young aristocrats they were pretending to be, and told no one that the boy who lived had just felt his oldest enemy stir 100 feet away. And no one saw, because a boy rubbing a headache at a feast is the least interesting thing in a hall full of bats. Narcissa got the letter about the turban and read it in the stone room at Malfoy Manor and did not sleep. She knew what a scar that answered a man might mean, and the knowing was worse than any of the disasters she had rehearsed. She had built a fortress against the world's curiosity, against Moody's eye, against Snape's memory, against a ministry clerk with a file. She had never fully let herself build against the possibility that the thing itself, the diminished, scattered, less than ghost she had told 2 children about in the hall, might not be waiting patiently in Albania for a body, but might already be here, in the one castle she had sent her children into, wrapped around the back of a stammering man's skull. She wrote 3 letters that night. One to the children in cipher, calm and specific. Stay away from Quirrell, tell no one, trust the coat, I'm watching, you have the socks. One to Andromeda, less calm. I think he's in the school, Dromeda. I think the thing that killed James is teaching defense, and I cannot go and get them because getting them is the one thing that ends everything. And one she did not send, that she burned in the grate before dawn, that was to a man in a cell in the sea. And that began, Sirius, I have your godson, he has your friend's laugh and your friend's wife's eyes, and I am more afraid tonight than I have been since the night I stole him, and I would give a great deal to have even you to stand beside me now. And she burned it, because there was no owl that could carry it, and no version of her life in which she could afford to have written it. And she watched it curl to ash and went back to being in the morning, Lucius Malfoy's poised and ornamental wife, with 2 children in a castle 100 miles away carrying the whole weight of her in socks with a corby at the ankle. Hermione, given a mystery and a threat in the same week, did the only thing her nature permitted, which was to research them both until they surrendered. She did it the Slytherin way, which she had learned faster than anyone expected, not by asking questions which announced a want, but by listening at the edges of other people's, by reading the castle as she read a book patiently for the thing between the lines. and by the middle of November she had assembled in her cramped, dense hand, in a notebook she kept warded in the bottom of her trunk, a picture that she laid out for Harry one night by their small fire. "The third-floor corridor's forbidden," she said. "Dumbledore announced it at the feast, the right-hand one, a painful death, don't go there. Nobody forbids a corridor for nothing. There's something in the school that needs guarding, and it came in this year because it wasn't forbidden last year. I asked a seventh year carefully about which parts were out of bounds when they started, and it wasn't. Something's here that wasn't guarded." And Hagrid, the big gamekeeper, the one who, she caught herself, because the big gamekeeper was the one who had wept in the ruin of Godric's Hollow, and neither of them ever said that lightly, the one who let something slip to a third year in the greenhouse queue about Gringotts and the school being the only safe place, and there was a break-in at Gringotts this summer. It was in the profit vault, emptied the same day it was cleared out. Something small enough to move from a bank vault to a school. Guarded behind a forbidden door, and your scar answers the man teaching defense. Harry watched the fire. You think Quirrell's after it, the guarded thing, and the door behind my scar is after it through him. "I think," Hermione said, "that we are the two people in this castle who know that the defense professor makes your scar burn, and I think we would be idiots to do anything about it. That's the part I need you to hear because you're you, and there'll come a night when you feel that cold and want to go toward it and be brave. We don't. We're not Gryffindors. She didn't raise us to charge a dark lord with a wand and a good heart. That's what got your parents killed. The hat as good as told you. We watch. We stay away. We write it all to her, every scrap, and we let the adult who has kept you alive for 11 years decide what to do with a thing this size. Our whole job is to not be found, and a first year investigating the defense professor is found. Say it back to me." "We watch, we stay away, we tell her everything," Harry said. "We don't charge." He looked up. "But if it ever comes to us, if the cold ever comes for us and there's no other door, then I'm the wall and you're the sea, and we call Nettle into a sock and we survive it long enough for her to arrive," Hermione said, "and not 1 second of it is us being heroes on purpose. Deal?" "Deal," said Harry, who meant it, and who both of them knew would break it the instant someone he loved was in front of the cold, because that was the one promise in his whole make that had never held and never would, and Hermione knew it, which was exactly why she planned to be standing next to him when it broke. They found their spot in the second week, and by November it was the only place in the castle where the coat came off. It was a disused study off the dungeon corridor, behind a tapestry of a shepherd who had lost most of his sheep to moth, a room the house elves had forgotten and the ghosts found dull, and Harry had lit its cold hearth on the first night, and Hermione had warded its door on the second, wall and sea between them making one safe room out of a castle full of enemies. They went there after the others slept, not every night, but the nights they needed it, and there, for an hour, they were not blacks. They were 2 children from a moor who missed an old elf in a cold library, and a woman who had to pretend on a platform not to know them. Nettle wrote to them there, by a route only Nettle and an elf's magic understood, letters that arrived in the warded room folded impossibly small and smelling of wood smoke, 3 lines of fierce spidery print reporting on the lambs and the weather and demanding, every single time, whether they were keeping their feet dry in the socks. Harry answered every one. Hermione read the set texts aloud by the light of candles he lit for her, both of them curled on the moth-eaten shepherd's hearthrug, and sometimes they did not talk about the danger at all, and those were the best nights, the ones where the room was only a room and the fire was only a fire, and the 2 of them were only what they had always been before the coat, before the castle. A boy who would go over any wall for the people he loved, and the girl who went with him so he would not go alone. "I hate lying to Draco," Harry said one night into the small fire. "Which is mad, he's awful. He said today that Muggle-borns thin the blood and everyone should be, and I sat there. I nodded. I'm supposed to nod." He turned a bit of kindling in his fingers. "And you sat there too, and you're the thing he was insulting. You're the Muggle-born that wasn't, and you sat there and nodded and were better at potions than him and let him think he's winning, and I don't know how you do it." "I do it," Hermione said, "by knowing something he doesn't." She pulled her knees up. "He thinks blood is a ladder and he's near the top. I know blood is a story the family tells to feel better about being cruel, and I know it because the same family that made him made me, out of a struck-off squib and a rescue and a right, and I am on the wall now next to the purest of them, and I am better than him at everything, and the tapestry doesn't care that his blood was never questioned, and mine was written off for 200 years. So when he says Muggle-borns thin the blood, I don't hear an insult. I hear a boy who's about to spend 7 years being quietly beaten by exactly the kind of person he was taught to despise, and not being allowed to understand why." She almost smiled. "That's not nothing, Harry. That's the best revenge there is. You just have to be patient enough to take it slowly." Harry looked at her across the little fire, at the girl the wheel of blood had called kin in the same breath as him, and understood, not for any first time but more completely than before, that Narcissa had not given him a cover story or a fellow prisoner. She had given him the other half of a single person, and that between the 2 of them, the sea and the wall, the warmth and the arithmetic, they were going to survive a castle that wanted them dead and come out the far side still themselves, because each of them was holding the part of the other that the world would otherwise have worn away. They had a ritual for the end of the hard nights, which neither of them had proposed and both of them kept. Harry would light the last candle down to a stub, and Hermione would read one page of something that had nothing to do with anything, a chapter of a novel, a description of a river in a country neither had seen, the dullest and most beautiful facts she could find, and for the length of that one page they would not be a hidden Potter and a stolen foundling in a castle of enemies. They would be two people and a page and a candle, which was, Harry had decided, the actual definition of home, and which he intended to have every night of his life once the coats came off for good, in some year he could not yet see. On a moor he was allowed to say the name of. 300 days, he said, roughly. 291, Hermione said, who had counted and banked the little fire and warded the door behind them, and the two of them went back out into the cold dungeon corridor and put their coats on in the dark, and were blacks again all the way back to the common room, and gave the castle nothing, and kept between them the whole of everything that mattered. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The certain mornings, the morning the walls nearly came down, Harry forgot the scar, and it was a Tuesday, and he was certain, and Narcissa had told him 100 times that the certain mornings were the ones that would kill him. He had been up half the night with the scar aching, a low grinding pressure that had nothing to do with Quirrell being near and everything to do with something far off turning in its sleep and dreaming of him. And when the dormitory bell went he had surfaced from 3 hours of thin sleep with his head full of grey water and gone down to breakfast on instinct, robes on, tie straight, hair flat, everything in its place except the one thing that could not be seen to be missing. He had not renewed the glamour. He had done it every single morning for 7 months, wandless, before his eyes were fully open, and this was the morning his body did the whole familiar sequence and skipped the one invisible step, because the step was invisible even to him, and a thing you cannot see is a thing you cannot check by looking. He was halfway through his porridge at the Slytherin table when Snape came down the hall. Snape had taken to walking the length of the tables in the mornings, which he had never done before Christmas, and everyone in Slytherin knew it was about the two black cousins even if no one could have said how they knew, and Harry had learned to give the passing black robes the flood without looking up. He gave it now. He kept his eyes on his porridge and let the surface of his mind babble about the Transfiguration essay and the weather over the lake, and Snape's footsteps slowed as they came level with him. The silence went on a beat too long. Hermione across the table looked up first because Hermione was always looking, and what she saw made the blood go out of her face and then at once come back because she did not have the luxury of showing it. She saw what Snape was looking at, not Harry's eyes, his forehead. The fringe had fallen back when Harry bent to his bowl, and there, on the pale skin above his eyebrow, faint but forming, surfacing through 7 months of perfect concealment like a shape coming up through ice, was the ghost of a thin, jagged line. The glamour was failing, not gone. Failing the way a charm fails when it has not been fed, thinning by the minute, and in a minute more it would be a lightning bolt on the forehead of a boy named Black in front of Severus Snape, who had knelt at a dead woman's body 11 years ago and would know that scar in his sleep. Hermione did not think. Thinking was too slow. She knocked over the jug. She did it with her whole arm, a clumsy, ordinary schoolgirl's accident, and a pint of cold pumpkin juice went across the table and into Harry's lap, and Harry came up off the bench with a yell that needed no acting, and in the noise and the mess and the scramble Hermione was around the table, and at his side with her handkerchief, fussing, scolding, a girl mortified by her own clumsiness. And under the cover of her body and her chatter and her hands she pressed 2 fingers to his forehead as if pushing back his soaked fringe and breathed, so low it was barely a shape in the air. Scar, fix it, now. Harry fixed it. He shut his eyes on the pretext of the sting of juice and reached down into himself, past the grey water and the grinding ache, and found the old wandless sequence and did the step he had skipped, and felt the glamour take and thicken and seal. And when he opened his eyes his forehead was smooth again, ordinary, a boy's, and it had taken perhaps 4 seconds, and 4 seconds was 3 seconds longer than it should have been possible to survive with Snape at his shoulder. But Snape had been looking at the juice, not the forehead, in those 4 seconds, because a jug going over is a loud, bright, ordinary thing, and even a suspicious man's eye goes to the splash. When he looked back at Harry the scar was gone, or had never been, and there was only a wet, red-faced 11-year-old and a scarlet-cheeked girl apologizing and a table in disarray, and Snape stood over the mess with his black eyes moving between the two of them, and something in his face was not satisfied, was very far from satisfied, but had nothing left to hold. 10 points from Slytherin, Miss Black, he said softly, for an excess of animal high spirits at the breakfast table, which was a punishment for a crime he could not name, and he swept on down the hall and did not look back, and Harry sat down in his wet robes and did not shake because he had been taught not to, and Hermione went back to her seat and picked up her spoon with a hand that was perfectly steady because she was making it be, and under the table her foot found his and pressed hard. And did not let up for a long time. They wrote to Narcissa that night, and they did not soften it because she had raised them not to soften things. I forgot the scar. It surfaced at breakfast with Snape 3 feet away. Hermione spilled a jug and I fixed it in 4 seconds, and he saw the splash and not the mark. It was the certain morning. You were right about the certain mornings. And Narcissa read it in the stone room at Malfoy Manor and put the paper down and pressed her fingers to her own mouth, and understood that the plan she had built to last 7 years had come within one distracted heartbeat of ending in its first, and that a wall which fails once has told you the day of its failing is no longer a question of if. Severus Snape did not sleep well that spring either, and it was the same boy keeping them both awake. He could not make it hold together. There was a boy in his house named Harry Black, provincial, arrogant, unremarkable, whose records were thin but not impossibly thin, whose family was distant but not impossibly distant, and who had, when Snape looked at him, the exact green eyes of the only person Severus Snape had ever loved, set in a face that was otherwise nothing like her, and who went unreadable the moment Snape reached for his mind, which no 11-year-old should be able to do, which meant someone had taught him. Which meant someone had a reason. He did the thing his nature demanded, which was to gather facts and refuse to feel anything about them until they were complete. He wrote discreetly to contacts at the ministry's records office, and found that the paperwork for the 2 black wards had been filed by the Black family solicitor, correctly, years ago, and led nowhere he could follow. He examined the child's potions work and found it competent and characterless, the work of a pupil hiding how much he knew, which every child in Slytherin did, so that proved nothing. He watched the girl who was plainly the clever of the two and plainly devoted to him in a way that went past cousins, and who guarded him without appearing to guard him, and whose own mind, when Snape brushed it, was a wall so smooth and so total that he came away certain she had been trained by a master. Trained by a master, that was the phrase that would not leave him. 2 children, sorted into his own house, occluding like veterans at 11, with a scar-shaped absence of records and a pair of Lily Evans's eyes between them. Someone powerful and careful had made these children and hidden them and sent them here, and the only reason Snape could imagine for hiding a child so completely was that the child was worth a war, and there was only one child in Britain worth a war, and that child was dead. Everyone knew he was dead. He had vanished 11 years ago, and Albus had torn the country apart looking and never found so much as a hair. Never found so much as a hair, because someone had hidden him too well. Snape sat with that thought for a long time in the dark and did not go to Dumbledore with it, because he was not a man who handed the headmaster an unfinished thing, and because a part of him he did not examine did not want it to be true, and did not want it to be false, and wanted, most of all, to look once more into those green eyes and be sure. He decided to wait and to watch and to catch the child in a single unguarded moment. One slip, one morning the mask dropped, and then he would know, and then he would decide what a man who had loved Lily Evans owed to the son she might have hidden behind an enemy's name. He did not know that the unguarded morning had already happened, 3 feet from him, over a jug of pumpkin juice, and that he had been looking at the splash. So he went at the wall instead of the sea, because the wall was where careful men attacked, and he kept Hermione back after a lesson on a gray afternoon in May alone on the pretext of a poorly labeled sample, and shut the door. Miss Black, he did not sit and did not let her sit. You are the finest student I have taught in some years, and I do not say that to flatter you, because I do not flatter, and because we both know you already know it. You are also the most carefully guarded child I have ever had in this room, and I have taught the sons of Death Eaters. A girl does not learn to close her mind like a bank vault by the age of 11 unless someone with a great deal to protect took a great deal of trouble to teach her. So I am going to ask you a plain question, and I am going to watch your face while you answer it, and I want you to understand that I am very, very good at watching faces. He leaned in, black eyes steady. Who taught you to occlude? Hermione looked up at him, and she did not build a wall, because a wall is a thing a man like Snape can see you build, and the seeing is the confession. She did the harder thing, the thing Narcissa had drilled into her across a scrubbed table 1,000 miles and 1,000 years ago. She let her face be a puzzled child's, and she let a genuine feeling up to the surface to be read, choosing it, offering it, a true thing that pointed the wrong way. My great-aunt's household did, sir. Before she died, there was an old tutor. He said clever girls got their thoughts pried into by rude men, and I should learn to keep them private. She let a flicker of something stung in real show, the bafflement of a girl accused of something she couldn't name. Is it against a rule? I didn't know it was against a rule. Am I in trouble for it? And Snape looked at her, at the puzzled, wounded openness of it, at the true feeling floated on top of the buried truth, and could not find the seam, because there was no seam, because Narcissa Black had made these children too well, and after a long moment he straightened and said, very quietly, No, you are not in trouble, go. And she went unhurried, a dutiful girl dismissed, and did not run until she was 2 corridors away, and then found the warded room and Harry in it, and shook once hard and let herself, for exactly 1 minute, be an 11-year-old who had just lied to the most dangerous reader of faces in Britain and won, and then she stopped, because a minute was all they could ever afford, and put the coat back on. At Malfoy Manor, Lucius had begun quietly to follow the money. It was not suspicion at first, it was accounting. Lucius reviewed the family holdings every quarter with the thoroughness of a man who trusted no one, including himself, and this quarter a figure had failed to reconcile. A standing arrangement with the black solicitor, small, regular, a decade old, paid out of Narcissa's settlement to an account Lucius could not identify, for services he could not name. His wife had money of her own and the right to spend it, and he had never troubled himself about her tedious northern inheritance, the aunt's ruin she had spent a decade pretending to set in order. But a decade was a long time to set a house in order, and the payments were not the payments a person makes to repair a roof. They were the payments a person makes to keep a thing running. And a thing that has been kept running secretly for 10 years out of a wife's private funds through a solicitor sworn to say nothing was not a hobby. He did not confront her. Lucius never confronted a thing before he understood its shape. Confrontation was for men who had run out of patience, and Lucius had never in his life run out of patience. He made inquiries of his own through his own people, the ones who did not answer to the black solicitor. He asked for the deed to the northern property, and learned that there was no northern property in any registry, that the aunt's ruin his wife described did not on paper exist, which was either an error or a fidelius, and Lucius Malfoy did not believe in errors. He asked what the Aunt Cassiopeia had left, and learned that her considerable estate had passed entire to Narcissa and been, from the day it passed, invisible. A recluse aunt, an unplottable house, 10 years of secret payments. A wife who vanished north 4 or 5 times a month, on schedules she had never once explained, and returned with a particular stillness on her that Lucius had noted for a decade, and filed as her temperament, and now, turning it over in the cold light of the ledgers, wondered whether he had misfiled entirely. He thought about it for 3 weeks and told her nothing, and watched her across the dinner table with the same courteous attention he gave a rival whose position he had not yet mapped. And Narcissa, who had spent 30 years reading exactly that attention, felt it land on her and knew, with the calm that came to her in the worst moments, that the front she had guarded least because she had trusted it most, the front of her own marriage, had begun to move. She did the arithmetic she had done 1,000 times and had never let herself finish, and finished it now. If Lucius learned the truth, he would not rage. Rage was for smaller men. He would calculate. He would weigh a wife who had betrayed the cause and hidden the Dark Lord's chief enemy under his own name against the ruin that exposing her would bring on the house of Malfoy, and against the credit that delivering Harry Potter would buy him if the Dark Lord ever returned, and he would arrive at whatever answer the ledger gave coldly and act on it coldly, and she did not know which way the ledger would fall. Because she had never in 20 years of marriage been certain her husband loved anything more than his own position, including her, including their son. She began that spring to prepare for the possibility that she would have to choose, in a single hour with no warning, between her husband and her children, and to make sure that when the hour came the choice would already have been made, so that she would not have to make it while it was happening. She made it now quietly at her own dinner table, watching Lucius watch her. The children, always and only the children, whatever it costs, whatever he becomes. She let none of it reach her face and passed her husband the salt and asked him about the ministry, and he told her, and they were, to any observer, the handsomest and coldest couple in England, sitting on top of the largest secret in the country, each of them now aware that the other was hiding something, neither of them yet willing to be the first to reach for the wand. Draco came home at Easter and handed his father, without knowing it, the piece Lucius had been missing. He was full of the term at dinner, as boys are, and Narcissa listened to her son as she listened to everything, from a great calm distance with the whole of her attention, and she heard the danger coming 3 sentences before it arrived. Draco was complaining about Snape. Snape, who was meant to favor Slytherin, who was meant to favor Malfoys above all, had been distracted all year, obsessed, Draco said, with the 2 provincial blacks, watching them at meals, prowling the tables, and it wasn't fair, and did father know why the head of their own house should care 2 nuts about a pair of poor relations from the north? The black cousins, Lucius said. His voice did not change at all, which was how Narcissa knew. Described them. Dull, Draco said with the contempt of a boy repeating his mother's own letter back to her. The girl's clever, I'll give her that, top of everything, but no manners, no name to speak of. And the other ones, I don't know, quiet, sharp when you don't expect it. Green eyes, this unnerving green, and he goes still, sort of like he's deciding whether you're worth the trouble. Snape can't stop looking at him, it's embarrassing, he's a nobody. Green eyes, a boy who goes still. Severus Snape unable to look away. Narcissa reached for her wine and drank unhurried and set it down and said, in a voice of perfect boredom, Severus was always sentimental about strays. I shouldn't refine upon it, Draco. It reflects poorly to be seen to notice who a professor notices. And Draco, corrected, subsided, and Lucius said nothing more about it and turned the conversation to the Quidditch, and was, for the rest of the meal, the most charming he had been in months. He was charming because he had just at his own table watched a shape complete itself. A secret property that did not exist, 10 years of hidden payments, a wife who vanished north on unexplained schedules and came back still as a held breath. And now 2 children of a black branch that Lucius, who knew the family tree to the last twig, was privately certain did not exist, one of them a boy with green eyes who made Severus Snape forget himself, in a year when the whole wizarding world still whispered, on the anniversaries, about a green-eyed woman's vanished son. Lucius Malfoy was not a man who leapt to conclusions. He was a man who let a conclusion assemble itself, piece by piece, and then acted only when it was too complete to be wrong. He was very nearly there. He needed one thing more, one confirmation, and he decided over the Quidditch, watching his beautiful wife laugh at something their son had said, that he would have it before the term was out, that he would go north himself, quietly, to the property that did not exist, and see with his own eyes what his wife had been keeping for a decade in a house that no map remembered. And Narcissa, laughing at her son's joke, felt the decision settle on her husband across the table, unspoken, complete, and knew that her time had just been counted out for her, and that she had, at most, weeks. The scar got worse as the spring went on, and Harry began to understand that the thing behind the door was no longer sleeping. It came at night, mostly. He would surface out of dreams he could not hold with the line across his forehead burning cold, and a sense, fading even as he grasped at it, of having been somewhere else, somewhere dark and low-ceilinged and hungry, of having looked out of eyes that were not his at things he could not name. Once he woke with a word in his mouth that he had never heard and did not know, and wrote it to Narcissa, who wrote back that he was never to say it aloud and never to reach toward the dreams, that a door opened from both sides and a boy who went looking through it might find something looking back. One night in late May the dream was sharper than the rest, and he could hold a little of it after. He had been in a stone chamber lit green, and there had been a mirror in it, tall, gold-framed, and a voice that stammered and a voice that did not, arguing about what the mirror showed in a terrible impatience, a sense of a thing very close to a prize that had crossed continents and 11 years to reach and could not quite close its fingers on. He told Hermione the pieces at breakfast, low over the porridge, and Hermione, who had been building her picture of the guarded thing all year, went still. A mirror, she said, guarded behind the forbidden door with the thing everyone's protecting, and it shows something, and he can't get it out of the mirror. She turned her spoon. That's the last defense, then. Whatever's down there, it comes down to a mirror and whether he can take the prize out of it. And he's close, Harry. You dreamed him being close, which means we're near the end of whatever this is, and I don't like being near the end of things I don't understand. She did not eat. Write it to her. All of it, the mirror, the green light, the 2 voices arguing. Every night now. She needs the map even if we never use it. He wrote it that night and every night after, and Narcissa in the south assembled from her children's dreams a picture of the thing below the school that was more complete than anything Dumbledore had, and could do nothing with it but wait and be ready, because to act on a child's dream was to reveal the child, and revealing the child was the one move she could not make. But the worst of it was not the dreams. The worst of it was the growing, certain sense, which he did not tell even Hermione for a week because saying it made it real, that the thing behind the door had started to notice him. For 10 years it had dreamed of him the way you dream of an old injury. Now in the castle close 100 feet away on the back of a stammering man's skull, it had begun to feel the particular shape of a scar it had made, and to wonder in whatever was left of its shattered mind why that shape was here in this school under this roof, alive. When he finally told Hermione in the warded room, she was quiet for a long time. It doesn't know it's you yet, she said at last. If it knew, it wouldn't wonder. It'd act. So it feels the scar and doesn't understand it, the same way Snape feels your eyes and doesn't believe them. Everyone in this castle is circling the truth about you, and not one of them can make themselves land on it because the truth is impossible, because Harry Potter is dead. She pulled her knees up. That's the whole plan still holding. But it's holding by inches now, Harry, and there are 3 of them circling, and they're all getting closer, and any one of them landing means all of it. Snape. Lucius, if she's right about Lucius and the thing, 3 walls and she's the whole sea defense and she's 100 miles away being someone's wife. She looked at him. We have to be more careful than we've ever been, and I have a horrible feeling careful isn't going to be enough because careful only works until the day something happens that you can't be careful about, and I don't think we get to choose the day. We call nettle, Harry said, if it comes to it, into the sock. She comes wards or no wards. If there's time, Hermione said, if we're conscious, if it's the kind of danger you can see coming. She banked the fire. Promise me something. If it ever goes wrong, the real kind of wrong, you don't try to be the hero of it. You don't go toward the cold to save me or anyone. You grab the sock and you say her name and you keep us both alive until the family comes. Heroes die, Harry. Your parents were heroes. She didn't raise us to be heroes. She raised us to be survived. I promise, Harry said, and Hermione looked at him for a long moment and did not believe him and loved him for the lie and warded the door behind them. Narcissa took the risk in April because she could not go one more month watching all 3 fronts move without laying eyes on the 2 people she was fighting for. She could not go to the castle. But she could go to Hogsmeade under a glamour, on a day the school did not send students down. and she could have Andromeda bring the children out of the grounds through a gap in the wards that Andromeda, as a healer with old Hogwarts connections, could arrange for an afternoon. And she could sit with them for 2 hours in a private room above the Hog's Head, where the barman asked no questions of anyone and never had, and she could hold them, which she had not done since the platform in September. They came in cold from the walk, and she had them against her before either could speak, one under each arm, the old accounting done in an instant, hair and hands and the new heights of them in Harry's forehead, which she checked with a cursebreaker's fingers even now, even here, and found sealed. They were taller, they were thinner. They had the particular watchfulness now that she had spent 11 years hoping they would never need and knowing they would, and it broke something in her to see it settled into their faces, and she let none of it show, because showing it would alarm them and they had more than enough to carry. "Listen to me," she said, when they had eaten the food she'd brought and the first fierce holding was done and they could talk. "All three of them are moving, Snape's suspects. Lucius suspects me, though not yet you, and if he lands on the truth I do not know which way he'll turn, and I have made my peace with not knowing, and you must too. And the thing in the castle is waking. I have known for weeks that I sent you into more danger than I understood in September, and I have lain awake every night since deciding whether to pull you out, and I have decided, and you are not going to like it, and it is right." She took a hand of each. "You are staying. Because pulling you out now in the middle of the year, 2 blacks vanishing from Hogwarts overnight, is the one act that would tell all 3 of them at once that they were right, that there was something to hide, and they would tear the country apart to find where you'd gone, and this time they would be looking with the truth in their heads instead of an impossibility. The safest place for you still, even now, even with the thing in the walls, is exactly where everyone can see you being ordinary. I hate it. It is true. 2 more months, get to summer, get home to the moor, and then we disappear you properly over a holiday, slowly, invisibly, and you never come back, and the school is told you've gone abroad. 2 more months of the coat, and then you take it off for good." "And if it comes for us before summer?" Hermione asked. "The thing, if it doesn't wait for your timetable." Narcissa was quiet, and then she told them the truth, because she always had. "Then you run, and you call Nettle, and you hold on until I come. And I will come. There is no ward on this earth that keeps me from you if you call, and there is no version of the next 2 months in which I am not ready, day and night, to be at that castle in the time it takes to fall. I have a way in that no one knows I have. I have had it for 11 years against exactly this. You are never as alone as you feel in there. You feel alone because you are wearing the coat. Under the coat, the whole family is holding the other end of a thread that runs straight to this room." She pressed the socks, which she had brought clean and new, 1 pair each, into their hands. "The old ones are worn through, I'll wager, and you've not told Nettle because you didn't want to worry her. New ones, same charm. You grab, you say her name, you hold on. That is the entire plan for the worst night, and it is enough, because it has an elf and a healer and me on the other end of it, and God help whatever is in that castle if it makes me use it." Harry took the socks and held them and did not say the thing on his face, and Narcissa read it anyway, because she had been reading his face since it was 15 months old in a ruined cottage. "Say it," she said. "You've earned the right to say a hard thing to me. What is it?" And Harry said low, "What if the plan's wrong? You've never said that before. In 11 years you've never once said a plan might be wrong, and today you said I don't know which way Lucius will turn, and I don't know, and I hate it." Narcissa looked at him for a moment, and then she gave him the last true thing she had, which was the only reassurance she had ever trusted. "The plans can all be wrong," she said. "Every one of them can fail. The wall, the sea, the sock, my way in, all of it. There is exactly one thing in this that cannot fail, and it is that I will come, not the method, me. If every plan on this earth breaks, I will still be trying to reach you when the sun comes up, because that is not a plan, Harry. It is simply what I am. Hold to that one. It's the only part that was never a scheme." They held on to her until Andromeda said it was time, and then they put the coats on in the room above the Hog's Head and became blacks again, and went back up to the castle through the gap in the wards, and Narcissa sat alone in the private room for a while after they had gone, and did the one thing she permitted herself, which was to be, for the length of a single held breath, a mother who was terrified, and then she put that away too, and glamoured her face. And went south to be a wife who was hiding something, and waited for the hour she had spent 11 years bracing for and preparing for in equal measure. She spent those last weeks making the worst night impossible to lose. She had built the fail-safe years ago, but a plan left in a drawer for a decade is a plan that has quietly rotted, and she took this one out and tested every part of it. Nettle's summoning charm on the socks she checked twice, from north and south, until Nettle popped into the stone room at Malfoy Manor at a whispered word, and popped out again before the portraits could wake. Her own way into Hogwarts she checked as well, the thing not even Dumbledore knew she had. A token of the old alliance between the House of Black and the school, a rite of passage older than the current wards, keyed to black blood, that would open her a door in the castle's defenses that had not been used in 2 centuries, and that no living warder would think to watch. She could be inside the walls in the time it took to fall. She had built it against exactly the night that was coming, and she had built it well, and she permitted herself, in the last week of term, a thin measure of something close to confidence. She had wargamed the wall failing, and the sea failing, and the marriage failing, and the ministry landing, and Snape landing, and Lucius landing. She had a countermove ready for every one of them. She sat in the stone room the night before the last examination and went down the list one final time, and found no gap, and let herself believe for one night that she had thought of everything. She had not thought of the one thing because it had never occurred to her that the enemy could reach the summons itself. She had guarded the door and the wall and the blood and the name, every road that led to the children. She had never imagined that the thing hunting Harry would not come down any of her roads at all, but would reach out through the one connection she could not ward, the scar, the door that opened from both sides and cut the thread from the inside, so that when the worst night finally came, the children would grab the socks and say the name into the wool, exactly as they had been taught, and no one on the other end would hear. The hour came in June, on the night of the last examination, and it came in the end through the door behind the scar. Harry had gone to bed early, wrung out from a day of quills and cold sweat, and the scar had been quiet through the exams, which he had noticed and not trusted, because a thing that hunts you does not go quiet unless it is busy. He fell into the gray water of the not-quite sleep the scar gave him now, and he was somewhere low and dark, looking out of borrowed eyes at a corridor he half recognized. A third-floor corridor, a forbidden door standing open where it should have been shut, and a voice that was two voices, one stammering and one that was barely a voice at all. A cold hiss under the world, saying something about tonight, about the stone, about the fool of a headmaster called away to London by a false summons. About the way being clear at last, the borrowed eyes went down. Harry, riding behind them, saw the guardians of the thing fall away one after another as the two-voiced man passed them. A vast dog with 3 heads, slack and snoring over a harp that played itself. A chamber where dead black vines lay withered. A room of broken chessmen scattered like a battle lost. And then at the bottom of it all, a chamber lit green, and the tall gold-framed mirror from the earlier dream, and the two-voiced man standing before it, staring into it, snarling at it, so close to the end of 11 years of ruin that the hunger of it came up the connection and into Harry's sleeping chest like cold water poured down the throat. And then the cold voice stopped. In the dream, in the dark, it stopped and went still, and Harry felt it turn, the way a hunting thing turns when the wind shifts, and he understood with the whole of his sleeping body that it had felt him. Not the scar this time, him. The mind at the other end of the scar, reaching down the connection it had only wondered at for months, and finding at the far end of it, awake and listening in the dark, the shape of the very thing it had come to Godric's Hollow 11 years ago to kill. "You," said the cold voice in the dream, low and unhurried, with a hunger 11 years old. "You are here. You have been here all along. Come and see what I am about to become, little survivor, and let me finish what your mother's death interrupted." Harry came awake with the scar tearing white-hot across his forehead, and a scream locked behind his teeth, and the certain, total knowledge of 3 things at once. That Voldemort was going through the trapdoor tonight, that the one man who might have stopped him had been lured away, and that the thing in the castle now knew exactly who and where Harry was, and was, at this moment, deciding whether to take the stone first or the child. For one long moment he lay rigid in the dark of the dormitory, with the scar screaming and Hermione's voice in his memory saying, "You don't go toward the cold. You don't be the hero of it. Heroes die. Your parents were heroes." And every particle of what Narcissa had built into him agreed with her. Stay, wake no one, call the family, let the adults handle a thing the size of a Dark Lord. That was the plan. That was the whole discipline of 11 years. And then the borrowed memory of the mirror rose in him, and the cold voice saying, "Let me finish what your mother's death interrupted," and Harry understood that the thing was not merely going to steal a stone tonight. It had felt him, it knew him, and a creature that had crossed 11 years to kill a boy, having found that boy asleep down a corridor, does not take the stone and leave the child for later. It comes for both, which meant the danger was not only down the trapdoor. The danger, once the stone was in its hand, would come up the stairs looking for the one loose end it had never been able to cut, and it would find, in the Slytherin dormitories, 2 children and no wall between them, and it but a glamour on a scar. He was out of bed and across the common room and into the girl's stair before the castle's charm could stop a Slytherin from doing what no Slytherin ever did, and he was hammering, low and urgent, on the first-year door until Hermione came out with her wand already up and her wall already built, reading his face in one glance. "It's tonight," he said. "It knows me. It's going for the stone, and it knows I'm here and Dumbledore's gone. We have to call her now. We have to call her right now." And Hermione, who had planned for this exact moment for months, who had a sock in her fist before he finished the sentence, gripped the gray wool with the corby at the ankle and lifted it to her mouth to say the one word that would bring the whole family down on the castle like the roof of the world, and nothing happened. She said it again. Nettle, nothing. No crack of apparition, no elf, no answer, only the cold dungeon air and Harry's white face and the horrible dawning understanding on Hermione's own, because she was the cleverest witch of her year and she had just worked out, 3 seconds too late, what it meant that the scar had gone quiet through the exams while the thing in the walls made its plans. It had not gone quiet, it had gone to work. Somewhere above them tonight, before it went for the stone, the thing that hunted Harry had reached out through the one connection it owned and done the single thing that would leave the survivor exactly as alone as he had been in a ruined cottage 11 years ago. It had found the thread that ran north to a moor, and it had cut it. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Trueborn the sock was dead in Hermione's fist, and she said the word a third time and a fourth, and the wool stayed only wool, and Harry watched the cleverest witch of her year run out of plan for the length of the 4 seconds it took her to understand what had been done to them. It cut it, she said. Her voice came out very flat, which was how Harry knew it was bad. She had gone through the whole thing in her head in a single second as she went through everything and come out the far end with only one conclusion and no way around it. The scar. He reached down the scar and cut the summons. That's why it went quiet through the exams. It wasn't resting. It was learning the shape of the connection, learning it well enough to sever what runs alongside it. Nettle can't hear us. Nobody can hear us. We did everything right, and the one road out is the one road he owns. She did not finish it. She did not say alone, because saying it was a luxury and they had no luxuries left. She dropped the sock and grabbed his hand instead. Wool for warmth traded for the warmth that was left. New plan. We don't need to reach her. We need to stay alive until she reaches us on her own, because she will. She's got the watch on that house, and Nettle's got a bond that a cut thread won't kill, and the second a summons breaks off half-said it tells the other end that something's wrong. She'll know. She always knows. We just have to be alive when she comes. It's coming up the stairs, Harry said. He could feel it, the cold, climbing, the scar drawing its white line brighter with every floor the thing rose. It couldn't get the stone, the mirror wouldn't give it up, and it's worked out that I'm the key, that it needs me at the mirror, so it's not going for the stone anymore. It's coming for me, to use me and then to finish me. He looked at her in the green dark of the dungeon corridor. We can't go up, we can't go to a teacher, it's a teacher that's coming. We can't get out, the doors are keyed for the night. Hermione, there's nowhere in this castle it can't follow us. Then we don't run through the castle, Hermione said, and the plan came back into her voice all at once because she had found the one door left. We go to the one place in the castle that's ours, the warded room, the shepherd tapestry. I built those wards, Harry, I built them for a year, and they're keyed to us and nobody else, not a professor, not a Dark Lord writing one. It can follow us anywhere in this castle except through a door I made to keep everyone but us out. We hole up, we hold the door, we stay alive, and she comes. She was already pulling him. Wall and sea, you be the sea, I'll be the wall, move. They ran, they did not make the room. They made the corridor outside it, the dungeon passage with the moth-eaten shepherd 20 feet ahead, and then the cold came down the stairs behind them all at once, no longer climbing but arrived, and a voice said, Harry Potter, in 2 voices layered wrong, and Harry felt his own legs stop against his will, some old compulsion in the scar answering the thing that had made it. Quirrell stood at the top of the passage, and he was not stammering now. The nervous flutter was gone entirely, slewed like a costume, and what stood in the turban's unwinding was upright and cold and certain, and when it reached up and pulled the cloth away there was a face on the back of its head, a face that was barely a face, white and flat and snake-nostriled, with red eyes that found Harry across the dark and held him the way the mirror had held the stone. 11 years, said the face on the back of Quirrell's head, in the voice that was under the world. 11 years a shade, 11 years less than a ghost, and all that time the child I came to kill was not dead at all. He was hidden by a black of all the ironies, raised on my enemy's blood as a servant of the very families that served me. Come here, Harry Potter, come and look into my mirror and give me what is mine, and I will make your death quicker than your mother's. No, Harry said. His legs would not move him back, but they would not move him forward either. He stood locked in the corridor with the scar tearing and Hermione's hand still in his, and he did the only thing left in him, which was to refuse. You want me at the mirror, that means you can't make me. That means you need me to want to come, and I don't, and you can't take a want. You can only kill me, and if you kill me, you never get the stone. So I'm going to stand here and not want it, and my family is coming, and you are going to lose again to a mother who won't move out of your way. It's the only trick you've ever fallen for. You'd think you'd have learned. The red eyes narrowed, and Voldemort did the thing that the whole of his broken nature demanded, the thing he had never once been able not to do when a child stood in his path and told him no. He stopped bargaining. Then die first, he hissed, and I will find another key. Quirrell. Take him. Quirrell came down the corridor and closed a hand around Harry's throat, and screamed. The hand that gripped Harry's neck blistered where it touched him, the skin cracking and blackening and smoking as though it had closed around a bar of white iron, and Quirrell reeled back with his ruined hand held to his chest and his mouth open on a sound that had 2 voices in it, one of a man in agony and one of a shade in something worse, a sound of pure disbelief that anything in the corridor could burn it. Harry stood in the corridor with the print of a burning hand cooling on his throat and understood nothing except that he was not dead, that the thing could not hold him, that some old fire lived in his skin that ate the touch of the dark. What is this? Voldemort snarled from the back of the burning man. What protection? She is dead, the mudblood is dead, I killed her, her charm should have died with the war. It isn't only hers, said a voice from the top of the stairs, cold and clear and level, a voice Harry had waited his whole life to hear arrive in exactly this tone. Lily Potter died for him once, and then a black raised him for 11 years and would die for him now, and love is not a candle that goes out when the first hand that lit it is gone. It is a fire that every hand that loves him feeds. You never understood it living and you understand it less now. Get away from my son. Narcissa Black stood at the head of the passage with her wand in her hand, and 11 years of leashed ferocity finally, gloriously, let off the leash, and behind her, filling the stairwell, came the family. It had begun on the other end with an elf sitting bolt upright in the dark. Nettle had been dozing on a stool by the banked fire at Corby House. As she did every night the children were away, one ear always turned to the bond, and a little after midnight the bond had done the thing it had never done in 11 years. It had pulled hard, a child's hand grabbing the summoning charm and a child's voice starting to say her name, and then it had been cut, severed, mid-word, gone, a silence where a scream should have been. An elf's bond does not break clean. Nettle felt the two children reach for her and vanish, felt the wrongness of a thread cut by something dark on the far end, and was across the hall and screaming into the mirror before she had finished waking. Narcissa was awake at the first syllable, because she had slept for 11 years the way a mother of an infant sleeps, half in the world. She was out of Lucius's bed and into the stone room with her wand and the old black token in her fist before Nettle had finished the sentence, and the watch on the house confirmed what the cut thread told her. The children had called and been silenced, and only one thing in the world could silence a summons keyed to their own blood, which was a thing that had a claim on their blood, which was the thing behind the scar. She did not waste a breath on the horror of it. She had wargamed everything but this, and finding the one gap in her defenses open under her children, she did what she had trained herself to do, which was to stop planning and start moving. She keyed the old token, the rite of passage between the House of Black and the school, 2 centuries unused, and felt it answer her blood and open her a door in the castle's wards that no living warder watched. She threw word to Andromeda through the paired mirrors, Hogwarts, now the thing has them, the way in is open, follow my blood, and she turned to go, and found her husband standing in the doorway of the stone room he had never once entered in 20 years of marriage. Lucius had followed her from their bed. He had been watching her for weeks, waiting for the confirmation his patience required, and here it was, all of it in one collapsing minute. The secret room, the ancient token, the panicked elf in the mirror, and his wife with a wand in her hand and murder in her face, saying the name Hogwarts and the words the thing has them and the word son. Whose son? Lucius said, very quietly in the doorway in the dark. There was no time. That was the thing that made the choice for her. There was no time to lie, no time to manage him, no time for 30 years of technique. There was only the truth thrown at him bare as she had thrown help at Andromeda on a doorstep 11 years ago. Harry Potter's, Narcissa said. I took him the night the war ended, him and a foundling of our own lost blood. I made them blacks by the old rite, and I raised them on the moor, and I have lied to you every day of 11 years, and the thing that killed his parents has him in that castle right now. And I am going through this door to stand between them whether you help me or kill me, and you have the length of one breath to decide which, because I will not spend a second breath on you while my children are dying. Choose, Lucius. For once in your ledger-keeping life, choose something the ledger can't. And Lucius Malfoy, who had never in his life done an uncalculated thing, looked at his wife, the coldest, cleverest, most perfectly controlled woman he had ever known, standing in a hidden room with her whole soul finally showing on her face for a pair of children who were not even his, and made in one breath the only genuinely unweighed decision of his adult life. Move over, he said, and drew his wand and stepped through the door in the wards at his wife's shoulder. If we are to be ruined, we will at least not be ruined by half measures. And I find, he added, in a voice that surprised him more than it surprised her, that I would rather not lose you to corridor, whatever else I lose tonight. They came into the dungeon passage together, and for one impossible moment the two halves of Narcissa's life stood in the same corridor at last. Behind her came Lucius, pale and cold, and for once in 20 years, on the wrong side of the Dark Lord. Behind him came Andromeda, out of breath, wand up, a healer who had spent 11 years being the door in the wall. And an instant later, with a crack that split the green dark, came Nettle, who could go where no witch could, who had followed the bond straight to the children the moment the way was opened, and who placed herself in front of Harry and Hermione with her ears flat and her thin arms spread and her enormous eyes blazing, an elf between 2 children and a Dark Lord, and hissed, "You will not." Voldemort, on the back of a dying man, looked at the family assembling in the corridor and understood, too late, the shape of what had beaten him. A black, he said, a blood traitor, a Malfoy-turned-coat, and a house elf. This is what stands between me and the child, this rabble of the disloyal. This is a family, Narcissa said, and moved to her children and put one hand on Harry's shoulder and one on Hermione's, and the moment she touched them the corridor changed. It began in the 2 heritage wands, the hawthorn and the vinewood, waking in the children's hands to the nearness of the blood that had keyed them. And it ran up through Harry and Hermione and into Narcissa's hands where she touched them, and back down, a circuit closing, a current the old rite had built into their marrow the night she made them blacks, and that had been waiting 11 years for the one condition that would light it. The family whole together in genuine and total love, with the house's own Trueborn children at the heart of it. The tapestry on a moor 200 miles north blazed gold in an empty hall. And here in the dungeon, the same gold rose up out of the two children and their mother and reached for Andromeda and for Nettle and even, after a startled instant, for Lucius, because the rite did not care what a man had been, only whether he stood inside the ring of it and meant it, and Lucius Malfoy, to his own astonishment, meant it. It was the light of the rite Cassiopeia had left in a smoke-written hand, the light that had leapt from wand to wand in a locked case and stitched two names in gold on a wall of the dead. And it knew every person it touched, and it counted them, and it found them kin, not by the thin arithmetic of blood the family had murdered its own children over, but by the older reckoning the house had forgotten and Narcissa had spent 11 years remembering, the reckoning that asks only whether you would stand in the fire for the one beside you, and answers for itself. The gold closed around the family like a second skin, like the inside of a bell, and where it touched the shade on the back of Quirrell's head, it did what Harry's skin had done to Quirrell's hand, it burned. "This is the protection you never understood," Narcissa said, walking her children forward inside the light, forcing the shade back down the corridor step by step, her voice never rising above the level. "You made yourself out of murder, and you cannot abide the touch of the other thing, the thing my whole ruined family forgot and I remembered in time. You killed his mother and armored him for life. You drove my sister out and gave me an ally. You imprisoned my cousin and left me a cause. Every cruelty you ever did to the House of Black, you did to the wrong Black, and it has all come due tonight in one corridor on the last of your borrowed body." The gold flared. Quirrell's stolen flesh began to blacken from the feet up. "You should have stayed a shade in Albania, Tom. You came back for a boy and you found a family, and a family is the one weapon you were never able to make or break or buy." Voldemort screamed and tore free. He did the only thing left to a thing that could not touch them and could not hold its host. He abandoned the body. The shade ripped up out of the back of Quirrell's head in a plume of black smoke as the man beneath it crumbled to ash inside the gold light, and for one terrible instant the smoke gathered and turned and drove straight at Harry, at the scar at the door it owned, trying to force its way back into the one thing in the corridor it had a claim on, and Hermione stepped into its path. She did it as she had done everything for 11 years, without calculation, because the thing was going for Harry and she was the wall, and a wall does not do arithmetic. She raised the vinewood wand that had turned toward her in a case full of dead men's magic and thrown gold light for a foundling the family swore was spent, and she did not flinch, and she said in a clear cold voice the family's oldest word, the one Narcissa had spoken over both of them the night she made them: "Ours." And the gold answered her because she was Trueborn and the house knew her, and it flung the shade back from the door of Harry's scar the way a slammed hand flings back a thief, and the black smoke shrieked and recoiled and could not pass her, and broke and fled, up through the castle, out through a window, gone into the dark toward the far country it had come from, beaten a second time by a wall of love it had no tool to break. The gold sank slowly out of the corridor, drawing back into the two wands and the two children and the blood that had answered, until the dungeon was only a dungeon again, cold and stone, and littered with the gray ash of a man a shade had worn out. Harry turned to Hermione before he turned to anyone, because he always would, and found her already turning to him, and they did the accounting they had learned from the woman who made them, hands and faces and eyes, each checking the other for the harm that had not this time landed. Her hands were shaking. His were steady, which was strange, until he understood that his were steady because hers were not, and that this was the arrangement and always had been. Whichever of them broke first, the other held. He had been the wall one more time, had stepped into the path of the thing that owned his scar and told it no with the family's oldest word, and now that it was over the wall was allowed for a moment to be a shaking 12-year-old, and Harry put his arms around her in a corridor full of staring adults and let her, and did not care who saw because the coat was off now for good and there was no one left in the world he had to hide the true thing from. "You stepped in front of it," he said into her. "You promised me you weren't a hero." "I lied," Hermione said, muffled, fierce, undone. "So did you. We both always lied about that. It was the only lie she never managed to make stick." She pulled back and scrubbed her face with the heel of her hand and was, in the space of one breath, the wall again, because a minute was still all they could afford, even now, even here. "She's coming down the corridor, coat off, but stand up straight. There's going to be a reckoning, and I want us on our feet for it." And it was over. The immediate part of it, the part with a monster in it, and the harder part, the part with the truth in it, was only beginning. Dumbledore reached the corridor 11 minutes later, having turned his phoenix around over the Midlands the instant he understood the London summons was a lie, and he came down the dungeon stairs at a run that no one had seen the old man use in years, and stopped at the sight that met him, and for once in his long life had nothing prepared to say. He took it in as he took in everything, all at once and completely. The ash that had been Quirrell, the scorch of a great magic spent, a Malfoy and a Black and the disowned Andromeda Tonks and an elf standing together, which was an impossibility on its own. And in the middle of them 2 Slytherin first-years, one of whom the headmaster saw now, with the glamour spent and the truth standing plain in a dead man's ashlight, a lightning scar on his forehead and Lily Evans's eyes. "Ah," said Albus Dumbledore very softly, and it was the sound of a man watching 11 years of his own certainty rearrange itself. "So that is where you went." "That is where I put him," Narcissa corrected, and did not let go of the children, and did not lower her wand entirely, because she did not yet know what the most powerful wizard in Britain would do with the thing he had just learned. "Before you could bury him alive under a Muggle stare to keep him safe and small until you needed him grand." "Yes, Albus, I took him. I have raised him 11 years as my own, as a Trueborn Black, loved and taught and guarded every hour, and tonight he and his sister drove off the thing you have spent 11 years failing to prepare him for, and they did it because I raised them to be survived and not to be martyrs. Whatever you mean to do about it, do it knowing that first." Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment, and then he looked at Harry, and the thing that crossed his face was not calculation, or not only. "I placed him with his aunt," he said quietly, "to keep the blood protection alive through his mother's sister. I believed it the only shelter strong enough." He looked at the print of the burned hand still faint on Harry's throat, at the ash of the man the protection had killed. "It appears I was wrong about the shelter. It appears the protection needed not blood but love, and a great deal of it, sustained across 11 years. His blue eyes came up to Narcissa's, and there was something in them that was almost a bow. "You did in 11 years of hidden devotion what I could not do with the finest theory in Britain. I will not pretend that is easy for an old man to say." "Then you won't take him," Narcissa said. It was not quite a question. "Take him?" Dumbledore's voice was gentle. "Narcissa, I have spent 11 years searching for a lost, defenseless, unprotected child, and instead I find a loved and formidable one, standing in the ash of the enemy I dreaded most, beside a family who would clearly die before they let him go. Why in Merlin's name would I take that apart?" He inclined his head. "No, I think, if you will permit an old man to be useful for once, I think we protect it, together. The secret does not have to leave this corridor. It can grow larger by exactly the number of people in it, and no larger, and those people can spend the coming years doing what you have done alone for 11, keeping 2 remarkable children safe long enough to grow up. If you'll have me, I have rather a lot to make up to the child in that scar, and I should like to begin." "He stays a Black," Narcissa said. It was not negotiable, and she did not pretend it was. "In the open, at your school, as my son, protected by everyone now in this corridor and no one beyond it. The wider world goes on believing Harry Potter is lost, for as long as that keeps him safe, and the day it stops keeping him safe we decide together, all of us, what the world is told. He is not a symbol you produce when it suits a plan. He is a boy who is loved, and he will go on being one, and your part in that, Albus, is to be one more wall and never once the man who reaches for the sword too early. Those are my terms. There is no version of this in which I have any others." "They are better terms than I deserve to be offered," Dumbledore said, "and wiser than any I would have set myself. I accept them without reservation, and I will hold to them." And he meant it, and Narcissa, who could read a lie off any face in Britain, saw that he meant it, and lowered her wand the last of the way at last. Severus Snape had come with Dumbledore, and he had said nothing at all, and he did not speak until the others had begun to move, and then he crossed the corridor and stopped in front of Harry and looked at last, without pretense, into the eyes he had been unable to stop seeing all year. "Lily's eyes," he said. It came out of him rough, torn up from somewhere he never let anyone see. "I knew them. Every day since September I knew them and told myself they could not be hers." He looked at the scar, at the child, at the whole impossible fact of him. "I nearly caught you over the pumpkin juice. I was looking at the splash." Something moved in his face that no student had ever seen there. "It is as well I was looking at the splash. I have spent 11 years believing I failed the only person I ever—" He stopped. He did not finish it. He never finished it, that sentence, to anyone, ever. But he turned to Narcissa and inclined his head a precise degree and said, "Whatever you need of me in this, whatever it costs. Her son does not go unprotected in this castle while I stand in it." And Narcissa, who understood exactly what it had cost him to say a word of it, gave him back the only currency they both trusted, which was a nod, and the matter was settled between them without another syllable. Harry looked at the sallow, bitter man who had hunted him all year and understood, as he always understood people, that he had just gained another guardian, one made entirely of an old wound and a debt to a dead woman, and that it was one of the strangest and most solid things anyone had ever handed him. "Thank you, sir," he said, and meant it, and saw the man flinch at being thanked by Lily Evans's eyes and let it be. Then there was Lucius and Draco. Draco had been brought down by the noise in his dressing gown, white-faced at the top of the stairs, and he had heard the last of it, enough of it, and he stood now staring at his mother with her arms around 2 children who were not him, at his father standing on the wrong side of everything, at the stranger called Black who had a lightning scar and green eyes, and was, apparently, the most famous person in the world. "I've had two others," Draco said, and his voice cracked on it, a boy discovering that the map of his life had been redrawn without him. "All this time, you had two others and you never." "I had one son I could keep in the light," Narcissa said, and let go of Harry for the first time all night to cross to Draco and take his stunned face in her hands. "And two I had to keep in the dark, and it was the one wound of my life that I could never let the three of you be a family in the same room. That is over now. You have a cousin, Draco, who is on the wall beside you, Trueborn and A." She almost said cousin again and did not because Hermione deserved the true word. "And another who's more black than half the men who ever sneered the name, and you are going to know them now in the open, and I think when the shock of it wears off, you are going to find that being one of three is a great deal better than being one alone. I did not raise you to be an only child. I only lacked the means to prove it." And Draco, 11 and undone, looked at the two strangers who were his blood and did not know yet what he felt, and that was all right because he had years now to find out, which was the one thing none of them had ever had before. Lucius said nothing to any of it. He stood a little apart, a man watching the entire architecture of his loyalties and his advantages collapse into rubble, and counting, out of lifelong habit, the cost. And then Harry crossed to him of all people and looked up at the cold man who had chosen once in a doorway to come through it and said, "You didn't have to in the corridor. You could have handed us all to the smoke and been a hero to it if it ever comes back. You didn't." Harry held out his hand, the plain impossible openness of him that no one had ever trained out. "I don't know what you are, but tonight you were family. Thank you for tonight." And Lucius Malfoy looked at the outstretched hand of the boy who lived, whom he had spent one night failing to deliver to the Dark Lord he had served for 20 years, and understood that he had crossed a line he could never uncross, and that the crossing had felt unaccountably like the first free breath of his life. He took the hand. "Do not," he said with the ghost of his old drawl, "make a habit of thanking me. It is bad for my reputation, of which I appear to have very little left." But he did not let go of the hand for a moment longer than he needed to, and Narcissa saw it and put away, somewhere very deep, a small and dangerous seed of the thought that her husband might yet turn out to be a person. The serious business took the summer, and it was Narcissa who finished it because she had been quietly building the case for 11 years, and now, with Dumbledore's weight behind her and nothing left to hide, she could finally spend it. She had the threads. She had the accounting she'd done of that night in the street. She had a decade of careful questions, and she had, most of all, the one fact the whole conviction had never troubled to check, which was that Sirius Black had never been the Potter's secret keeper at all. She had traced it patiently through goblin records and old testimony, and the particular silence of a small gray man named Peter Pettigrew, whom the world believed dead and blown to pieces, and whom Narcissa had come, over years, to believe was neither. It took the summer and Dumbledore's testimony and a great deal of black gold spent on lawyers who asked no questions. But by August there was a retrial, and by the end of it a gaunt, shaking man walked out of Azkaban into the light, exonerated, and stood blinking on a dock after 11 years in the dark, while his cousin Narcissa, whom he had every reason to hate, walked up to him and said without preamble, "I have your godson. He has James's laugh and Lily's eyes and my great-aunt's stubbornness, which he came by honestly, and he has wanted to meet you since he was 9. Come north, there's a house you were never told about, there's room." And Sirius Black, who had gone into the dark believing every person he loved was dead or damned, went north to a moor, and found a boy who ran at him across a walled garden as he had once run at James, and was undone entirely on a doorstep in front of everyone. He knelt down in the gravel to be at the child's height and could not speak for a while, this gaunt, shaking man who had lost a decade to a lie. And Harry, who had grown up short on parents and long on watchfulness, looked at his godfather's ruined face and saw under the ruin the friend his mother had married into and the laugh Narcissa had told him about, and did the Harry thing, which was to close the last of the distance himself. "You came for me," Harry said. "She told me. 11 years ago you came for me first, before anyone. You just got there and I was already gone." He put his hand on the man's shoulder, steadying him. "You weren't too late, you were just early." She kept the seat warm. And Sirius Black made a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh, the exact sound James used to make, and pulled his godson into an embrace 11 years overdue. And over Harry's shoulder found Narcissa in the doorway, the cousin who had gathered proof for a decade to buy this exact minute, and said hoarse the only thing there was to say to her, which was her name, and she inclined her head, and that was the whole of the apology and the whole of the thanks that ever passed between those two, and it was enough. They were all at Corby House when the summer ended, which had never happened before and would happen every summer after. Nettle refused, as always, to sit at the table and served them all standing, and had knitted over the summer 6 new pairs of socks with the Corby at the ankle, because the family had grown and an elf measures love in feet kept warm. Andromeda and Ted came, and Nymphadora, whose hair went through the whole spectrum at the sight of Sirius, her cousin, alive. Sirius came, thin still, laughing too loud, sleeping badly, mending. And Draco came, sullen and fascinated, and slowly, over the weeks, thawing. A boy learning in real time that the cousins he had been raised to imagine were beneath him could outduel him. outtread him, and worst of all, most wonderfully of all, wanted him anyway. Lucius came for the last week and stood in the walled garden not knowing what to do with his hands, and was tolerated, and then gradually included, which was more than a man who had served the dark for 20 years had any right to expect, and exactly what a family the real kind is for. There was an afternoon in the last week that Narcissa kept afterward, the way a person keeps a stone from a beach. Sirius had got the three of them out in the walled garden, Harry, Hermione, and Draco, who 3 months before would not have shared a corridor with the other two by choice, and was teaching them a dueling trick that was half against the rules and entirely his own, and Draco had landed it on Harry and crowed about it, and Hermione had landed it on Draco a heartbeat later and said nothing at all, which was worse, and the three of them had ended up in a heap in the long grass arguing about whose fault it was. And laughing, actually laughing, the pale Malfoy boy and the two stolen blacks, cousins the wall had insisted on all along. Narcissa watched from the kitchen door with Andromeda beside her, and Andromeda said, "You did that, all of it." The three of them in the grass, and Narcissa did not answer, because there was no answer that would fit through her throat, and simply watched her children, all three of them, be children in the sun, which was the entire and only thing she had ever wanted, and had been told her whole life a black was too cold to want. And in the old hall on the wall, the tapestry held them all in gold. The two names Narcissa had made 11 years ago, and the older ones brightening around them now that the house was tended again. Andromeda's scorch mended at last into a living thread, Sirius restored from a gap to a name, even a new gold line running to a gray elf on the hearth, because the right, turned out, had never cared about blood so much as belonging, and the house had simply been waiting, all these dying years, for someone to remember the difference. Harry and Hermione sat at the library window that had been there since they were 9, on the last warm night before the train, and they were 12 now, and taller, and they had driven off a dark lord and freed a wrongly imprisoned man and turned an enemy into a guardian and a cold father into something almost warm, and none of it had changed the one true thing, which was that when the whole world had finally come for them, they had stood back to back, the wall and the sea, and let no one through. "We go back in September," Harry said, "in the open now, as us no coat, as blacks," Hermione said, "Trueborn on the wall and everything, you can't argue with the wall." She leaned into him as she had since she was 6, and put the old chewed board book she had carried out of a gray town 11 years ago between them on the sill, its corner still soft. "She saved us, both of us. Off a battlefield and out of an orphanage, and she raised us in secret and lied to the whole world for a decade so we could grow up loved instead of used. And when it all came out, the family stood in a corridor and burned the dark right out of the air." She was quiet a moment. "I used to lie awake bracing to be sent back. I worked it out this summer. There's nowhere to send me back to. This is the back. This is where everything sends you." Downstairs, Narcissa Black stood in the doorway of the old hall as she had 11 years before, watching the warm from the cold, except that now she was not in the cold at all. Now she was in the room, in the light, one of them, with a husband learning to be a person in the garden, and a freed cousin laughing too loud by the fire, and an elf serving socks, and two children at a window who had been the whole of the reason, and were tonight simply happy, which was the one thing she had wanted for them on the wars last night, and had spent 11 years and every scrap of her ruined family's technique to buy. She had been raised to believe that a black's whole strength was in what the family could hide. She had spent a lifetime proving that its whole strength was in what the family would refuse to let go, and she looked at the two gold names on the wall, and the whole bright, complicated found thing gathered under them, and she did not calculate for once how any of it could be taken from her. She simply climbed the stair to the window where her two children sat, and folded herself down between them in her good robes on the cold sill, exactly as she had on a morning 11 years before, and opened the soft-cornered book to its first ruined page, and with the family she had stolen out of the fire warm and loud and alive below her, began again to read. Chapter 7 End.